and that everyone stayed safe. It's incredible what happened. All right, so we'll go ahead and start the meeting. So we're at 7:04, and this is our first meeting of this calendar year. Why don't, since we have some attendees and guests, why don't we go around and committee members introduce ourselves? So I'm Cheryl Tagayas. I'm the chair of the committee, and I am the representative from the planning board. I'll go ahead and call on names so that we can keep it somewhat orderly. Tabor?
Tabor Keeley, a member of the committee, have been since just after the inception. I was also on the master plan committee originally, and I'm, I think, officially MAPC's rep to the committee.
And Dick?
Dick Burke, appointed member, also with, had the pleasure of spending some time with Tabor. He is from the master plan to the implementation committee up until today.
And Roxanne?
Hi, I'm Roxanne Musto. I'm the select board representative on the committee. Thank you.
Elaine?
Hi, Elaine Benson, member.
And Warren?
Hi, Warren Lizio, the newest member of the MPIC committee. Thank you.
And Regina?
Regina Campbell Malone, now not the newest member of the MPIC.
Okay, great. And we have staff support. Josh?
Josh Lee, I'm the assistant town planner.
And Josh has been great help to us. So thank you, Josh. So next, our next meeting dates, Roxanne predicted that there might be a conflict because of the special town meeting. So we had February 13th, but that won't work because that's the date for the special town meeting. So looking at February, we have February vacation. So if we try to stay to that same week, Roxanne, do you think it's anticipated that town meeting will go for more than one day?
Depends. I mean, hopefully not. I mean, hopefully just one thing. It will be some discussion, but I'm hopeful. But you never know with these things. But I mean, you could tentatively, I mean, you should have 2 dates maybe. I don't know.
Right. Okay. So
Can you do it Wednesday? Because that's not town meeting. Don't they skip Wednesdays?
They always do.
yeah, so I was going to suggest the 15th. Does that work for folks?
It's fine by
Okay.
me.
All right,
Sounds
so
good.
let's say the 15th. And then March would be our usual third Monday of the month, would be the 20th of March. Does that work for the majority of us?
Right now, yes.
Looks like it.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. We won't go out past that. Next item, the approval of meeting minutes. Thanks to Josh, we are staying very up to date on our meeting minutes. So thank you, Josh. Even in I emailed him while he was in California, not knowing that that's where he was, and he replied right away with meeting minutes. So thank you, Josh. Did everyone get a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, if there's no proposed edits, I will entertain a motion to approve. And the date of those is what again? Sorry, it would be December
Well,
12th.
Both.
Okay, all right.
I could make a motion to accept the minutes and approve them from December 12th.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Yep.
Several seconds. How about we'll give it to Dick?
I'll
Okay,
second. We'd be happy to second.
All right, so we'll do a roll call vote. Tabor,
Yes,
Elaine,
Yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Regina,
Yes,
Warren,
Yes.
and myself, the chair, yes. All right. Josh, do you mind if we move staff update towards later in the agenda so that we can address topics for which we have some folks here?
absolutely, no worries.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to suggest is that we take the last agenda item, which we added as we got a couple of requests that came in, because these are timely in terms of the CPC, the Community Preservation Committee. So we're going to take discussion of support for Community Preservation Act funding applications. And then after that, we'll go to the discussion of sustainability and climate change. Okay. So there's two applications that we were asked to weigh in on, one related to pickleball and one related to the Affordable Housing Trust. And so I wanted to see now if we have folks from representing, and no, I don't see that we have folks here. So did everyone, I actually had heard from folks that actually I should have, before I announced what we were going to do with rearranging the agenda, I should have made sure that these folks were here. They said they were going to attend, so I'm going to reverse the
We've
order.
just had someone join, Mary.
Oh,
Noble, who
okay.
Might be,
Oh, great. Mary Noble, no, it would be Mary Blanchette.
Mary Noble.
Blanchette,
Yeah.
there we go. Sorry, confusing my Mary.
Okay, that's okay. So why don't we then, we'll just give those folks a chance to come in, since they probably saw that they were later on the agenda if they looked at the agenda. So we will go back, and I just wanted to note on agenda item 4, which is related, the discussion of the Climate Action Planning Committee. There was a select board meeting last week, so this was why it was put here as a potential, but the select board did vote to appoint such a committee, and they are doing it according to the document that was circulated. And I think that the Sustainable Milton was involved in kind of formation, as well as the planning department, engineering department, and some others in getting this committee put together. So if there's Josh or Tucker or anyone else would like just to speak a few minutes about the committee, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, I'm happy to briefly introduce it, but Tucker has been one of the driving forces behind it. This builds on a lot of the work that my department has been doing in association with Sustainable Milton over the past several months on climate action efforts. This committee is the Climate Action Planning Committee, and it covers a lot of bases in terms of its appointing bodies. So it does have appointments from the Sustainable Milton, as well as Conservation Commission, from the Planning Board, School Committee, Select Board, Chamber of Commerce, and then the Town Administrator and 2 at-large members. Tim and I are very excited about the formation of this committee and its work. I know we were working with Sustainable Milton earlier in 2022 to get a similar committee off the ground, and it didn't work. So we're really glad that this second go around has been successful. And this will dovetail really nicely into the grants that we were awarded for $50,000 on a GHG inventory and analysis. So I think we'll have some really solid data in the next few months that'll help this committee focus on action and implementation and not have to worry about so much about getting data or analysis done. But I do welcome Tucker to speak more on it if she wishes, or any other Sustainable Milton member.
Well, actually, there are 2 of us here this evening from Sustainable Milton, and in particular, the Climate Action Plan Working Group. So I am Tucker Smith, and and with us too is Tracy Dyke-Redmond. And Tracy, I have been away. I am of an age where I travel a bit because our children have the nerve to live in California. But we do have a working group. There are 5 of us, including Henry McLean, whom some of you may have known, has been very involved, served on the Alternate Energy Committee dating back to 2010. And it's work that he and that committee did that really queued up the town of Milton as a green community. It was one of the early, probably first 10 or 15 communities through the Department of Energy Resources to be considered a green community. And many grants and funds have followed. But so Tracy, help me out with the working group. Let's see.
I think maybe it would just be worth mentioning, I mean, the working group's been very active. We're delighted that this select board has decided to go ahead and form the climate action planning committee. We think that's essential to forming a climate action plan and helping the town of Milton move forward with reducing our emissions, not only for our municipal emissions, which the town has already done a lot of work on, but for the town as a whole. So all the residents, all the businesses, and this plan should help us get there. I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at the charge of the Climate Action Planning Committee, but it does have 9 designees. And so those include from the school board, the select committee, the planning board, Conservation Commission, Sustainable Milton, Chamber of Commerce, town administrator, and 2 residents at large with relevant experience. So just to give you a sense of the kind of scope of the committee. And I'm sure that charge can be available if folks are interested to see more detail.
Yeah, it was shared with the committee beforehand.
Great. And I would say our working group, we have studied probably about 15 different climate action plans that other towns have developed, trying to extract what we think are possibilities. I mean, most towns are engaged in this process. Some are much farther along, or further along than than we are. But we have an enormous spreadsheet. Then we've plugged in all sorts of information under various categories. I think Josh has seen it. A climate action plan is not something that a niche group of volunteers can do. It really takes more expertise and bandwidth and funding. But the start, is there, and that's very exciting. So I look forward to seeing the committee itself fleshed out, and want to thank the select board and certainly Josh and town engineer Tim Sherwinski, Mira Patel for helping us. We've been in conversations for a really long time, so this is good.
So I thought that it was interesting and timely because our committee's been talking about a potential update for the master plan, which was completed in 2015. And in our last meeting, we said, there were those of us who said we thought that the sustainability and climate change aspects of that plan were probably one area of greatest need for update. And we'll be talking about other sections as well. But I did mention that because I had reached out to Tucker a few months ago to just to get up to date myself with Sustainable Milton was working on. And that got some conversations going and some emails back and forth. And so that led to my letting her know about our discussion tonight and inviting she or others from Sustainable Milton to participate. And then she also made me aware of conversations that they've been having with the Shade Tree Advisory Committee. So I welcomed those folks tonight as well. Certainly part of climate change has to do with the natural environment, our tree cover, et cetera. And so we're going to welcome comments from the Shade Tree Advisory Committee as well. So with that dialogue with Tucker and others that she shared it with, I had decided that it might be helpful to put together that document, which is really just pulling words out of that very lengthy master plan that related to some objectives. But I see that Tracy and Tucker and their group have added some others, which I circulated as well. And so I think those are certainly a good starting point for us. If you'd like to give us a little bit more thought behind, and we can pull up your email, or you can just start talking to what you sent to us. Everybody has a copy of it. So you're welcome to do it either way.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I could share my screen. I know Tucker made some additional additions, so maybe I can share my screen and
Josh, you might need to give you permission to do that, right?
I've just done that. You should be able to,
Okay.
Tracy.
Perfect. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. what we did here, Tucker has some language from the Town of Groton Master Plan on sustainability at the top, which kind of provides an example. And Tucker, you may want to speak to that in a second, but then just to orient you to the rest of it, we took the sort of language from the master plan goals and objectives, just as an overview of the master plan, and then added in some comments and things in yellow and in red that we would suggest adding. So you'll see that not everything has additions, but some things do, like around health and wellness and safety, housing and neighborhoods, etc. So it's not very long, but that kind of gives you a sense. And at the end, we would suggest adding this, the sustainability aspects into the executive summary and the top 20 key recommendations. But Tucker, anything you want to add or go through? From the
Sure.
beginning?
Yes.
Tucker, can I ask a question of both of you before you jump into a little more detail? Have you given thought how the work of the new committee, the Climate Action Planning Committee, and the Climate Action Plan that come out of that work would interface with the master plan? Do you think it would be something where it might be just something referenced in the master plan? I don't know if you've given any thought to it, but maybe you can give thought to it if and let us know if you haven't done so yet.
Sure. Now, I would say we have not yet, but I think it's our feeling that climate change and our response to it is sort of the filter or the lens through which everything should be done, or considered as those documents and things are developed. So, but that's something that going forward we can do. But
one other component, one other question
Sure.
related, somewhat related is, as an architect, I'm aware of updates to the building codes. And, the stretch code was just updated for residential, went into effect January 1st. For commercial, it will be going into effect July 1st. And then there's the opt-in, which I think of as the net zero, but I think they have another term for it, which it's the specialized code.
Specialized.
Yeah, which would take a vote of town meeting. So do you see that being something that Sustainable Milton's going to want to be involved in, or that this Climate Action Planning Committee would want to be involved in as part of what it looks at?
Tracy, do you want to?
Well, that is an aspect that I think would be very consistent, and I would expect that would end up in the climate action plan. So, with the plan, obviously the committee was just formed. We haven't written a plan yet, but we can kind of anticipate that there's going to be some core elements, and I'm sure that would be part of it. So,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I interrupted your initial comments. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I had the opportunity. We've technically owned a home in Milton for, actually it'll be 44 years next week. But we were away from Milton for about 12, 13 years and lived in Groton, Mass. And during that time, actually in 2010, 2011, the town of Groton, Mass did a master plan, and the sort of big yellow preamble at the very beginning of this document is its sort of lead off, and it at that stage, however many years ago, did it through the lens of climate change, and it gave a very interesting definition of what sustainable development, how they were going to consider it. So there's also a link to the master plan, both the 2011 version and when you click on that, if one clicked on that, it will drive you to the 2020 revision. And each of the sub elements of the master plan sort of considers certain aspects of, of sustainability and climate change. So it might be worth a look. I didn't want to dive down that rabbit hole tonight, but it's interesting that, it has been done, that way before. So I just wanted to say that
Tucker, do
was,
you know, do they have an implementation committee as well in Groton? Do you know?
you know what? I don't honestly know.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I've been away for a long time now, almost 10 years. And, you know, have not really been, you know, following what's going on in the town. But then just one other thing, I went back to Milton's, you know, master plan. And as the one that you're speaking of updating, and Tracy, if you could sort of scroll down to the end, you know, I noticed that there was a section, your section 7, which says strengthen capacity to plan and promote. And then that was really the only place, I mean, granted, I didn't read 233 pages really carefully, but there was very clearly, you know, there was the triangle, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle on page 57 or 58. And it says environmental sustainability. And then it lists sort of bullets of, you know, probably 10, 12 different items that are great ideas. They were considered ripe apples, I think, low-hanging fruit that would be low cost, impactful. And you know what? I don't think many of them have been done, and they could still be done. Very much looking not to reinvent the wheel, but, you know, to look at some of those, those items and suggestions there. And you can read yourself what they are. I added, a couple more to think of that other towns are thinking of. One is to replace for the town, municipally, to replace land management or land care management equipment such as leaf blowers, gas powered, those very loud fume spewing items of equipment, mowers and trimmers with, non-polluting alternatives. There is an organization which called Quiet Communities, which is nonprofit in Concord, Massachusetts, which is very much promoting these ideas, for health, wellness of people and planet. And you can check out that website. And I think as of now, at least 13 Massachusetts communities have implemented ordinances, that limit power tools of that, of that nature. Certainly, I think we're all reluctant perhaps to talk about mandates, but incentives perhaps for homeowners or this equipment can be costly. So incentives for, business owners. And then another thing is town sports. There's been, I'm sure many of you are aware, there've been proposals to expand the use of artificial athletic turf. And there are certain concerns about the fact of what it is made of, which is, made of plastic. And as of yet, there are not, there are not good ways to recycle it. So just sort of throwing those out there as a couple of things. Tracy, do you want to maybe dive into some of your thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Tucker. Yeah, just to kind of scroll back up here to the top. So going through the plan as it stands and things we might suggest adding in the physical character, enhancing tree canopy, estuary, Neponset River, in health and wellness, walking and bicycling. That's going to be really important. And that shows up a few places in the plan. I know there's the separate plan related to biking, but that's really essential for so many different things, accessibility.
On that topic, Tracy, you mentioned the bicycle pedestrian master plan, which our committee helped fund, and which we reviewed progress. It was produced by MAPC through the planning department, and we did have a discussion at our last meeting that we wish to support its adoption. But Sustainable Milton could also provide your support to the planning department or to the select board, who would be taking that up. A formal adoption of the plan would be via the select board. So while we've discussed it, it's really more as a committee that's been involved with it. But I think anyone who's really interested in seeing its adoption or its revision or any aspect of it, we want to make sure they send their comments to Josh and Tim, and they can, I'm sure, make sure it gets to the select board as well, or with a copy to the select board or the town administrator, however, Josh, however you think that should work. What's your suggestion?
I would go straight to the source, send it to town administrator, because
Okay.
that's just where we're going to send it anyway.
And then a copy to you and Tim. Would you do that as well?
You're welcome to.
Okay. All right.
Great,
So
that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
you're welcome.
It's been done by some members of the board and former members individually, but not as a group. And we're having a meeting soon, so that would be a good topic.
And Josh, do you have a sense of when that might, or maybe you do, Roxanne, when that might be taken up by the select board?
I don't think it's in our next meeting.
So there's time for folks to, Okay.
I believe so. I just
Okay.
printed it out somewhere here amongst my
Yeah.
papers.
so would
Um,
you advise, like, maybe within the next couple of weeks, if folks wanted to get the comments in, that would be a good time frame, or do you think more time
Sure.
is available, or?
Sure, I mean, certainly send them along. I don't see it on our agenda. For instance, we have a meeting tomorrow night. I don't see it on our agenda. I didn't think I did, but I definitely don't. So it could be at a subsequent meeting.
Okay,
I think that was one of the hopes, that would be in the next meeting, but I don't think that's been officially set out yet.
so that would be what, 2 weeks then from tomorrow, Roxanne?
February, I believe it's the 7th. We have a meeting tomorrow night. That was an added meeting because of the whole school building project with Fontbonne. They wanted to make sure we had that meeting, and then there's a bunch of other things on it. But the next meeting is February 7th.
So that
Great.
it might be on the agenda February 7th, so comments should be submitted. Okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure that while we're on that topic, I mentioned it. So Tracy, please go ahead with additional comments.
Thank you. All right, so in terms of housing and neighborhoods, I think a couple of things that we would really encourage are promoting efficiency and electrification. Those are core aspects of meeting our climate change goals, is to make the housing stock, both the existing housing stock and building stock more generally, and any new construction, as efficient as possible, and also less reliant on fossil fuels to the extent possible. So there's some resources that are mentioned in the notes here in terms of Mass Save being certainly a resource for homeowners and businesses and renters as well, for existing buildings. There's also the Massachusetts Commission on Clean Heat recently recommended a building decarbonization clearinghouse. That hasn't been formed yet, but I think that would be something to keep an eye on, because that may become a resource in the coming year or years. And then, as we were talking about earlier, for new construction, there's the specialized stretch code. And that is something that would encourage new construction to be as efficient and least reliant on fossil fuels as possible. Any questions about that? We're going.
Members, any questions?
I actually have a question. Josh, is there a discussion, within your office with Tim and in terms of the specialized stretch code?
Yeah, Tim and I have been in lots of conversations with our building commissioner, Joe Prondak, about adopting the specialized stretch code. Tim and I are both campaigning for it and are talking affirmatively about the adoption of it with Joe. But he's still had a lot of sort of questions and comments and nuance from the inspection services side of things that haven't been addressed by Tim and I yet. But Tim and I certainly intend to push it forward as much as we can within the department.
Thank you.
That's great.
And Roxanne, you have a question or comment for them?
Yes, I had a couple of questions. I was going through all the red line information. Thank you for putting this together. So some terms in there that I was hoping you could explain, some words I'm not, so when you say efficiency and electrification, can you explain what that is?
Sure. So efficiency is basically energy conservation. It means
Right.
using less. So that's often home weatherization or building weatherization, making the building envelope more efficient. But it can also mean more efficient appliances like home heating equipment, or any kind of appliances in the house. Yes, lighting. A lot of the efficiency in terms of lighting has already taken place in Massachusetts, which is great, but there's definitely still room for improvement in efficiency. And I think it's, I don't even know if half of the homes in the state are weatherized at this point. There's still room to make big improvements. And MassSave is sort of a big resource for that, with incentives for homeowners and businesses. And then electrification, this is a newer concept, I would say. And it's really recognizing that in order to meet climate change goals, we really have to move away from fossil fuels. And so that means reducing our reliance on natural gas, fuel oil, and propane, and instead relying on electricity, which over time, the source of our electricity is becoming more environmentally friendly. We're relying more on wind and solar and other renewables, and less on fossil fuels. So if we can switch what the sources of our power to electricity over time, even though right now we burn a lot of natural gas to make the electricity, over time that's going to become greener. And so that's the sort of investment we need to make now, especially when we're buying new equipment. Like, if you're buying a new heating system for your house, if possible, you want to make that heating equipment be based on electricity, not gas, because if you base it on gas, you're locking in that commitment to natural gas for many years to come. It is not simple. I work in the energy efficiency field for many years, and I can tell you that it depends on the type of building, it depends on the type of heating system. So it's complicated, and it takes some help to find out what is the best thing you can do for any particular building. But I think that's overall the direction that we need to go.
And may I ask a couple of follow-up questions? I'm just following along. So the other questions I have were, what is the clearinghouse for all building decarbonization programs?
Yeah, so this is something that has been recently proposed. The Massachusetts Commission on Clean Heat was something that was set up by Governor Baker, and they just issued their report and recommendations. I think it was in maybe even just December, in the last few months. And so that report is linked here, but basically one of the things the report says is that MassSave, which I've mentioned, is this program that offers a lot of incentives. MassSave was really set up for energy efficiency, and it's trying to adapt to electrification, but it wasn't set up that way. So the Commission on Clean Heat is saying we need a new resource for people to go that's going to be all encompassing and have all the information for energy efficiency and electrification. And so this is what they're recommending, as a decarbonization clearinghouse. It doesn't exist yet, but that's what they're suggesting.
Okay. Follow-up question. I don't know, Cheryl, if you're able to answer this one. With the stretch building code, my understanding is that we already have a stretch building code in town. So what is this new one going to do? And how is this going to affect existing homes in town? Is it just for new construction? And what is the difference?
Well, Tracy may be able to answer some of that too, but I'll answer
Okay.
what I do know is as the stretch code gets updated, so towns that have already adopted the stretch code, they update to the latest one or to the newest one. But the specialized stretch code would have to be a new opt-in. So it's either city council or, in our case, a town meeting that would have to approve that. That goes further than the stretch code in terms of looking to get to zero carbon emissions or close to it. And so part of they I've just been reading about it, so I'm not an expert by any means, but you have different pathways that you can get there. So if you go all electric, that's a pretty good pathway, but then you can also, and in that instance, there's not much allowance for fossil fuels. And if you do fossil fuels, like for, let's say, cooking, then you have to install renewable energy on site so that you're offsetting the emissions that your fossil fuel emitting equipment or appliances are generating. So the stretch code doesn't go that far. So Tracy, if you'd like to add to that, please do.
Yeah, I can't really add any more detail. I'm not an expert on it either, but I do know that, as you're saying, over time, the building codes are becoming more and more efficient, and the specialized stretch code is the most recent and most efficient option to try to encourage new construction to be the best it can be. I will say, in terms of new construction, generally speaking, we're talking about new buildings, but sometimes, and I don't know how much this would apply in Milton, but sometimes when you're reconstructing a building, you're doing big renovations, that can also count as new construction. And Josh, you may know more about that.
Yeah, the current stretch code and the new one will apply to new construction and then new additions of 1,000 square feet or more. So relatively large changes, but not just the construction.
But also if you're doubling the size of your existing house, for example. So if you have a, let's say 900 square foot house and you're making it 1,800 square feet, it would be triggered even though it's less than 1,000 square feet. There's provisions for adding or installing accommodation for electric vehicle charging, for example, for solar ready. I mean, there's a lot more of this information, I think, Roxanne, if we were looking to do this, just understanding the residential and commercial stretch codes first. And then, what would the additional requirements be if we went to that, opt-in version, the specialized code? I think that would take some understanding. And I would think that this Climate Action Planning Committee might want to take a look at that. But the first thing is to understand, what's in the stretch code. But really, it's all in line with what the state adopted in 2021 in terms of trying to reach our carbon emissions reductions. And buildings are a large component of carbon emission. Transportation is too, obviously. But I would say in new construction on the commercial side, there's a lot of movement, and on the higher ed side, there's a lot of movement already in this direction. I think what a lot of people, like Tracy said, it's existing buildings that really need a lot of attention, and existing homes. And so having incentives to help people, it reduces utility costs for folks as well. It's not wise to go purely electric if you haven't done your make sure that you're energy efficient overall because then your expenses are going to go up. The whole idea is not to have costs go up, from my understanding. So it's really, things have to go hand in hand in terms of the efficiencies. And as I said to Tucker, when my husband and I did some work on our house, we have gone all electric here, and we're happy with the heat pump system. We're happy with the induction stovetop, and we're happy with our electric vehicle. So we're trying to do our part and experiment with these things too, so we can report out. And hopefully other people in town can report out on what they've been doing too and what their experiences are. Okay, so any other questions before Tracy can continue? Roxanne, you're good?
For now, yeah, sure, for now.
Okay.
All right,
Great.
Tracy, go ahead.
So then, in addition to the discussion about efficiency and electrification, with regard to housing for existing locations, we would suggest encouraging more pervious pavement and reducing impervious pavement. This can help with flooding, which we expect become more severe and more frequent with climate change. And impervious pavement leads to problems with flooding. Tucker, I know this was your point, so if there's anything you want to add on this. So, maybe there's incentives or zoning or other encouragements that could help people move towards less impervious pavement.
Right, or reducing, lawn size and, doing rain gardens where runoff is, excessive, those kinds of things.
And in the next section, Tucker, do you want to speak to the economic development?
Sure. I mean, if a master plan is trying to promote economic development, there's certainly a place, I would hope, for green entrepreneurship and green jobs in town. And it talks about the various revitalize, improve. And there's a section of town, I don't even think it has a name, but I did see a playground, a proposed playground, and sort of this end of town was considered to be the west end. I don't know, I'm thinking of the Route 138 corridor along Curry College and the Fuller Village, that whole stretch. There's not a single place to buy a cup of coffee or drop off a pair of pants to be dry cleaned. So I don't know. I just threw that in there.
So before you jump ahead further, I think the planning department has identified West Milton as an area in need of planning work. So it is on the radar screen of the planning department, but you're right, it's not explicit in the plan. So it's good to highlight it as something in terms of a plan update, where some attention could be made. I just also want to just quickly go back to the comments that Tracy commented on the impervious pavement, et cetera. It is something that the planning board has been talking with the planning department and the engineering department about updating the rules and regs so that we can address some of these items. So again, it's not explicit here, Josh, it's something I know that people are working on, but highlighting it and raising it to a high level of prioritization is a good thing. So, but I just want to point out those things to you.
That's great to know. Thank you. Okay, I'll just jump ahead in the interest of time. I don't want to take up all of your meeting, but in the transportation and circulation, so we already talked about the bike plan, and I've made note of the opportunity to provide comments, so that's great. I think other aspects besides biking, and I think maybe the bike plan covers this too, but I mean, it's not just bikes, but it's also pedestrians and all kinds of non-vehicular travel around town, because of course, it probably goes without saying, but the more that we can get out of our cars and walk and bike and get other ways of getting where we need to go, the better it is in terms of environmental sustainability. So that's something that we would certainly encourage. And then also encouraging opportunities to put in electric vehicle charging infrastructure and greater public transportation, because again, that's going to reduce the climate impacts of driving if people adopt more electric vehicles instead of gas-powered vehicles, or even better if they take public transportation rather than driving individual cars. So putting in supports to help make that happen, I think will be really important.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then in the public facilities, services, and infrastructure, some of these things, sort of repeat some of the themes that we've talked about before. And so we've kind of talked about this first point, but I guess the point here is that when we're talking about town facilities, the town has more control over that. So, we can do more than just encourage, we can actually decide as a town, this is what we're going to do to promote efficiency and electrification.
So one
and-
thing I would mention here too is, there's 2 more fire stations that are contemplated and a new school contemplated. So, getting, whether this gets into the plan in time for those, but really getting in front of the committees that are working on those, I think would be a good thing for Sustainable Milton, for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely.
There's amazing work and organizations that already exist on net zero schools. And those resources are widely available and inspirational, and a lot of economic information and economic incentives now with, the federal funds. So
Debra, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just, this is on the sustainability issue and coming right to this point in the schools, and I'm glad it's addressed. But one of the concerns I had was I know statewide there is a limit on what can be disposed of food waste. And it seems like the town of Milton Public Schools exceeds that, yet only one school is attempting to do composting. And I'm just wondering, I'm not so sure how Milton skirts that, or is there something obvious that I'm missing?
well, actually, a Sustainable Milton initiative through 2 individuals in particular. One is a parent of a Glover School student, and the other is a parent of Tucker School student. And there is a plan to start pilot composting programs at Tucker and Glover.
Right.
Very soon. And with some, Chase Berkeley has made some, funds available to start that. I can't speak to all the schools, but, I think composting and recycling. I mean, COVID did not help, but I wouldn't say either process was very far along, before COVID. So
I know though that before COVID, at least the restaurants and colleges, private colleges, and I had thought that schools were included, but maybe public schools are exempt. I don't know, but it required if you generate more than 1,000 pounds of food waste, is it a day or a week? I've forgotten the details, but it seemed like, Milton would have qualified and all the restaurants were up in arms, but now I guess they've all figured it out. They're handling it. They're dealing with it. It's expensive and, but I'm wondering, if Milton is doing it in one school, would this not be something that, at least part of the plan should be doing it in all schools within a very short period of time? I mean, not like down 5-year plan, but like in a 2-year plan. But
well, I think that's, that's the hope, is to try it. I mean, they had workshops this week where the kids were in the elementary schools where we're making signage for the procedure, the protocol, this bucket, a simple, process. So I think that the plan is to try it in these 2 locations and see how it goes. I know they work very closely with the principals, the cafeteria staff, custodial staff, and it's due to roll out, I think, the end of February. So that's all I can say. I don't know about
Great.
more than 2 schools, but that's the ideal, is to have it be school wide, and then going not just elementary schools, but teach them while they're young and then get them used to the idea. I think there's going to be a field trip down to Hingham, perhaps the end of this week. That school has been doing, Hingham High School has been doing composting for years and has won some major national awards. So I think, it's starting.
great. Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Roxanne, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, I know that when my kids were younger, they used to have, a recycling program at the schools, the elementary schools. And I believe that I was involved with the outdoor classrooms, and I thought that, I think it was Kathy Smith, who used to show a lot of, bring in a lot of things with composting and things. I remember at Tucker, my kids happened to go there, but she was doing it, I believe, at different places, we were sort of trying to get that sort of niche with the outdoor classroom as well at the school. So I think there were, maybe it just all this stuff sort of dropped off at some point because of course you need people to sort of take it and run with it a little, and I think that's what happened. I think it was a lot of things were happening at that time. So
Well, sometimes good initiatives are only as strong and long lasting as are the volunteers to drive them. And this is something that if it is, institutionalized or municipalized, I don't know, it's not a word, but if you know what I mean, if it becomes,
right.
if it's part of the program, the town program, then it has more potential to be along.
We've certainly even seen that when going through the detail objectives in the plan and trying to gauge what status updates are. We've seen that when it's a department or an entity that has true responsibility for it, that it has been more successful when it's been more vague about who's responsible for it. And so even some of these things that you identified as low-hanging fruit, Tucker, if it doesn't have somebody who owns it, these are some things I think that we can follow up with, probably with the DPW on some of those low-hanging fruit that you identify, and then look at some of the larger items for an update to the plan. And I think in terms of the other suggestions about making it overarching, as you said at the outset, Tucker, and as is said here in your comments about adding these things to the executive summary and have them be thread throughout all planning, I think is a really important recommendation. And having us look at these things as being imperative to all decisions and all planning that's made. So I want to give you a few more minutes and then I'm going to ask the Shade Tree Advisory Committee and then we'll see if committee members have questions. Okay.
Sounds good. Yes, we appreciate all the time here. It's been a wonderful discussion. Just two last things I would touch on. We've talked about a lot of these things, but in terms of providing state-of-the-art municipal services, so Milton is now participating in community electricity aggregation, which has been really positive for the town, but there's more we can do in terms of encouraging and supporting residents to opt in, to opt into that and to opt in for the higher environmental benefits of that. So that's something that, there's different choices within the community electricity aggregation, and choosing the 100% environmental characteristics is certainly beneficial. And then the last thing I just want to mention, because I think it's really important and it may not be top of mind for people, is supporting all residents from all backgrounds in preparing for emergencies, because we're going to have more flooding, we're going to have more heat waves, we're going to have more power outages, all of this. Life is getting harder and it's going to continue to get harder as we face climate change. And so we really need to think about how to support all of our residents when we have those kinds of emergencies, whether it's elderly residents, whether it's families with children, whether it's people with language barriers, all residents. We need to make sure we're really thinking about and preparing for those kinds of situations. So just have some resources here on that in terms of an organization that works on that. And I think there's a lot of work going on in different municipalities around building resilience hubs. And that's something that Milton may want to look into. I think we've now covered everything. Tucker, did I miss anything?
No, I think you did a fine job and I thank you. I think
good. You both did a wonderful job and provided us with a lot to think about. Questions for them, folks on the committee? And Roxanne had suggested a citizen speak, which was too late for me to add to the agenda. So I will see, since there might be other people who are interested in this topic, if anyone else has any questions or comments on this topic. But before I do that, we will do Shade Tree Advisory Committee. And before that, I see Roxanne and Elaine, our committee members, have their hands up. So Roxanne first, then Elaine, please.
Sure, thank you. Just a quick comment that with, first of all, thank you for leading through this. It's very informative, a lot of information, a lot of new terminology and things. And Just it's really, packed full of information. So really need to sort of digest it all. But I would say the one thing that I think will be very important is if we're talking about implementation of some of these items for homeowners, for instance, I think we need to know what the costs are. And as far as you say, there are programs out there, but how much will they cover? I think cost is a big factor for a lot of people. If you're talking whether about a stretch code and expanding it, if you have an existing home, you might have an older home, and some of these changes could be quite costly at the onset, or mandating things for residents. I think, again, we'd have to get the input from the residents and see, what their opinions are and provide the right information. So that's all I would say is we really need to make sure we have the correct information for people so that we can understand what the benefits are and the costs are and to implement some of these things. Thank you.
Okay, I see Elaine, then Regina.
Hi, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
So I very much appreciate this effort by Tucker, Tracy, and Sustainable Milton, especially the formation of a climate action planning committee. Full disclosure, I am a former board member of Sustainable Milton. I just wanted to share that I agree that we would benefit from an update to the master plan regarding climate change mitigation and sustainability and enhancing our community's resilience to the impact of climate change. I agree with many of the thoughtful suggestions that they presented this evening, and just the comments that I had looking through, the suggested edits were, if we are to update the language to the master plan to reflect many of these topics, I think it's important that we incorporate language that's time-bound and measurable so that we can track the progress. So, for example, Tabor's suggestion on school food waste, or perhaps town-owned property energy consumption and carbon emission reduction, things that we can actually measure. I think that the goals are what are important and the partners in town that can help us to achieve those goals, but I think maybe we try to steer clear from getting into really detailed specifics. So, maybe removing business names, like we don't need to include that it's Black Earth or Bootstrap, but that the overall goal is to have more people compost. One more example would be, instead of a serious look at turf, to use something that's a little bit more broad, like develop best practices for green materials and infrastructure, for town-owned parcels and parks. So that's just my general feedback, but I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time and the energy to put all this together. Awesome work.
Thank you, Elaine. Regina?
I second and third their appreciation for all the work that went into this. I agree that there's some real specialty involved in terms of being able to put together research and digest a lot of the information and make it approachable, but from regular people like us. So thank you for that. I would add that in addition to Roxanne's great comment about including some cost, I think it would also be important to include the benefit in terms of, what would the cost, not monetary, but what would the cost be of not doing this, right? I think it's not an easy thing to do, but I think somehow making it clear that not doing it is actually the more costly thing in the long run is an important thing to make clear to folks who don't have those data. So again, thank you for your efforts and for making this top of mind.
Thank you, Regina. Anyone else on the committee? Anyone from the public? All right, then I'll go to the Shade Tree Advisory Committee. I think we have several people here, Branch Lane, Carol Stocker, and Fred Taylor. So I will leave it to you who would like to speak first. You're all welcome to speak. No, none of you want to speak.
I'm happy to try to go first here.
Okay,
Carol may want to say some things too. The 2015 master plan actually had a number of suggestions or a number of recommendations to try to preserve the town's tree canopy. I think it must have been understood in that committee how badly neglected our street trees were at the time, probably for a 10 years or more before that. And we had lost a lot of street trees. And so we've been trying to work on these things. The first suggestion actually was to have a shade tree committee. And so that's us. And we started in 2016. And there's the other things have been worked on, and I would say we've made a lot of progress on a lot of them, but there's still things that aren't completed, and at least one thing, the tree bylaw, which has not even been gotten much traction on at all at this point. I guess the point I want to make is that I think if there is an update to the master plan, that we should keep most or all these recommendations in the plan. Once you start neglecting the street trees and you build up a big vacancy, like we have now, about a 30% vacancy of street trees, it is really hard to recover from that. That's like 1,800 trees. And as much as the town is trying to plant now, it's going to take us a long, long time to get back to even down to 10%. It's just a long way to go and a lot of money. And every year you neglect it, that's just another bill you have to pay later. So that's one thing. I think in terms of the other things the Shade Tree Committee has been thinking about, our focus right now has been mostly on the street trees, and especially in terms of climate action. Everybody knows how cooling a row of street trees can be compared to a street where there's no protection at all. We have been thinking about our recommended tree list, thinking about what trees that we plant today might still be able to live here in 50 years. That's an important concept that we have. And we've added some more southern native trees to our list, and we've eliminated the northern sugar maple, which is already very stressed around here. And then I think the other thing that we're trying to pivot to a little bit is the parks and the playgrounds and the sports fields. We haven't really focused on them yet, but yet that's of course where a lot of people are at. And I think trees would be super beneficial there. And we haven't really, we're trying to talk to a landscape architect, and we need to talk to the Parks and Rec department and see if we can really build out what's going on in those fields. So I think that's really all I wanted to say. We have specifics that I would add to say an update of the master plan, but I don't think we have to go into them today, especially if Carol wants to get on board and say something.
thank you, Fred. And I think I did share your email with members. And so as we discuss more details about various sections of the plan, of the master plan, we can certainly take those specific comments into consideration. And we may, in fact, invite you back to focus on those, since I know at least Branch questioned about the agenda item. And this really, we did want to kind of keep this in the climate change aspect of it, because that falls into our agenda item, and not wanting to fall into an open meeting law problem. We want to make sure we're covering things properly. Before I go to Carol, I did want to say one thing. I see Denise Swenson here tonight, and when she was on the planning board, she and I did work on tree preservation as much as we could. It is something that I still have an interest in, and I know she has an interest in terms of any development. The loss of large trees is really takes time to make up, and so preserving our tree canopy and still allowing for new development is definitely something which we need more balance in our regs, because we didn't have a lot of tools at our disposal in reviewing plans. And so thank you, Denny, for our work together on that, and you're welcome to make comments. But before you do, Carol, please.
Oh, hi, can you hear me okay? Can you hear-
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I'm on this committee with Fred, and if the point is climate change, we're trying to plant new trees that are what they call legacy trees, which is they say they're still going to be alive in 50 years. But that's the species. But there's going to be a lot of mortality with trees. And the most important, I think one of the most important we could do is to have some enforcement that people who cut down trees illegally, which is happening every day, have a penalty. Now, in my neighborhood alone, there's 4 incidents where people have cut down street trees that were on town land in the last 18 to 22 months. In every case, it was a new house. It wasn't necessarily a new piece of land because people are buying houses and tearing down the existing house and putting up houses that are twice as large. And what they have done in every case is they cut down the trees, including the trees that are on the town land. You would think they would know where the setbacks are, but they don't. So you have a situation with scenic road bylaw. These are the only protected existing trees in town, but they're being cut down with impunity because there is no penalty. And as Branch has said to me, if they'd have all their permits already, and there was one case a few years ago where somebody didn't have their permits already, so we could make them replant, but we have no leverage if they've got their permits. So I think we need on that tree bylaw that we hope will go through the town meeting at some point, some kind of penalty for cutting down a mature tree, because every big tree may be irreplaceable. It grew up in a different climate when there was rain and so forth. And, it's going to be hard to keep, the old standard is, oh, we'll cut down a tree and then we'll plant a new tree that's even better. Well, it's not better if it dies. It's not better if it's going to take 100 years to have the root system that will sustain it through droughts. The great thing about the big trees is that they have their roots. So they're not going to keel over and die if you don't water them every week. So
I'm wondering if I may, Carol, or any one of you from the committee, I've seen myself with my own property, the kind of storms that we're having, the kind of storm water we have is really bringing down and damaging some very large trees. So are you seeing that as well? So the loss through the kind of the changes in our climate that we've been seeing?
Well, I think it depends on the kind of trees, which is why we've been urging people to plant oaks, which have very deep roots that can withstand flooding and drought and hold on to and absorb the water. So then mitigating not only the carbon footprint, but they're mitigating flooding. For instance, there was a plantation of 110-year-old oak trees on the town poor farm hill, which were clear cut apparently without discussion and sold off for lumber and replaced with lawns and little teeny stick trees. And those are the kind of trees that do mitigate flooding. But again, as I said, it depends on the species. So the tree list that is important to look at with those kinds of things in mind, that the DPW and the tree committee has put together, because it's not only an issue of what will survive in warmer summers and winters, more southern trees, but also what is going to survive flooding and as well as drought. But yes, we're going to lose a lot of mature trees. You're right, Cheryl. We are, because they're going to be really stressed. I do think, however, they've got a better chance of survival than new trees with their little root systems.
Okay, Carol, I'm going to take a couple of questions from committee members, and then if you have further comments, I can come back to you if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Tabor?
So two things. One, I've been a victim of that tree cutting one of my neighbors had, between me and Route 138, they owned an acre of land, and the abutter cut down about half acre of the trees. And my neighbors sued them, and they claimed that the landscaper didn't understand where the property line was, and et cetera. Brand new house, the property line was clearly staked. He didn't speak English, but he did, and on and on. And the court ordered him to pay, I think it was $15,000. But by the time my neighbor was done, it cost him $35,000 to bring the suit. So it was kind of really a stupid thing, and in the end, he made a point out of it, but certainly didn't make enough money to replant any of the trees. And so there was no enforcement. The town couldn't do anything, and it's not a scenic road, Route 138. So they didn't fall under some of those protections, and it seems that just because you fall under certain special services protection, what about the guy on the next street? It doesn't seem like that would necessarily be fair. So that's one point. The other one was a long time ago. My oldest son was, I think he was a kindergartner at Tucker, or maybe it was at Cunningham. I've forgotten. He went back and forth to these different schools, and they had 300 or 320 Liberty Elms that were purchased by a foundation under the auspices of the town, and they were bred, Liberty Elm was bred to not get the Dutch elm disease. So we ended up with 75 of them in our yard, and the town sold them for 100 or 150 a piece. I've forgotten. It was a fundraiser, and they were planted around the town. I know DPW planted quite a few of them. Unfortunately, the Liberty Elm is not that sturdy, and it is susceptible to all sorts of other diseases, just not Dutch elm disease. And so, for all the great plans, it really wasn't the greatest solution, but that was it. It was 150 trees, 28 years ago. And, I've got a bunch of them on my property. I know other people do, but it seems like that's the kind of thing that every kindergarten class should have, 10 trees. And, it would be one thing to be, vested in this, and it does make the parents aware. It makes the kids more aware. It's not a huge ordeal, but it's something that you do on an annual basis. The DPW goes through hundreds of trees, not 10, but I don't know the numbers on it, but it does seem like unless you get the population involved in doing it, it's really not going to be very effective.
Well, Tabor, my story will be that my son came home from school with a maple tree when he was in elementary school, and we planted that tree. It's a nice healthy tree now, and he's a senior in college, and he still says that's my tree when he comes home. So I do think having that kind of child ownership is a nice idea, and maybe that could be something brought to the schools. Branch, I see your hand up, and Regina will come to you next. Okay.
Oh, can I just say something quickly?
Sure, Carol.
The Liberty elm tree was kind of a scam. Those trees were not what they were represented as. It was a fundraising scam run by a guy in New Hampshire, and so your story underscores the fact that you got to get the right kinds of trees, and that they pulled that on tons of schools and Boy Scout troops and so forth, and they're just regular elm trees that are going to die. They're not the resistant ones.
Thank you, Carol. Branch?
Interestingly, I have points based on what Carol has said and what Tabor had said. Excuse me. I was one of the people that was scammed with one of the elm trees by a fellow named David Donovan, who was a teacher in the public school system. He wasn't someone from New Hampshire making big money off this scam. It was a project to support the schools. And the guy put a lot of effort into it. And as I say, my tree is fine right now. In commenting with what Tabor had indicated, that is a problem about trees being removed, cut down, whatever, essentially illegally by people. But as he indicated, unfortunately, to get restitution for the tree, you end up in a case where you're spending $35,000 to win a $15,000 suit. You know, I'm not sure what the answer is. Unfortunately, in regard to Carol's comments about trees being missing on her street, you know, I've gone out there, and if you don't see any evidence of a tree, well, it's very, very difficult to get restitution for that. You know, whether you have to start with insurance, proceed to attorneys, and go on and on like that to get the value of the trees. You know, the incident that happened at Parkwood and
Hillside.
in Hillside, you know,
Yeah.
that was egregious. I mean, the guy clear cut a whole area. So it was easy enough for the planning board and the tree warden to resolve that with a very, very substantial penalty. But, you know, a single tree missing on a public road, it's just very, very difficult to get that back. The real reason I wanted to speak tonight was about the ongoing tree program. I've had discussions with Chase. I've had discussions with planning board members, warrant committee members, select board members, and virtually everyone is on board that we need separate funding for trees so we can sustain an ongoing program. You know, luckily we've got our guardian angel kicks in money almost every other year. John Corey put together a huge program where we got about $90,000. You know, we've been very fortunate in some respects. However, as Fred indicates, we're woefully behind. And my suggestion is that I've discussed with Chase is to try to get a substantial or a reasonable amount of money in there, like $45,000 as a line item on the voted DPW page. In other words, those of you who are familiar with the warrant and how articles are voted at town meeting, there's typically 3 or 4 lines that are voted. And what we would like to do is add an additional line, which is for a purchase and replacement of town trees in the amount of $45,000. That covers about 150 trees, which Fred will say that's just about slightly over the loss ratio annually. But, you know, that's an item that Chase and I will discuss further. And we're going to look for support from Roxanne and her gang up there so that we can get this finally as a separate line that gets voted annually. So we're not, out trying to pick people's pockets and whatever to get a couple of bucks to pay for trees. $45,000 is nothing. I mean, I read in the paper the other day, and I don't want to disparage the schools, but I'm a big supporter of the schools. But when I see 7%, if you look at $45,000 in public works, it ain't no 7%, you know. So in any event, that was the only item on the punch list I wanted to give a plug to.
Thank you, Branch. I'm going to add one thing, Regina, before I call on you, if I may. I was surprised recently to learn that HUD, in their funding of affordable housing like Winter Valley, does not include tree planting in what they will pay for. And so at Winter Valley, any trees or landscaping has to come from a separate source of funding, which at the moment they don't have. I just thought that that's unfortunate. So pass that on to anybody if they want to figure out how to follow up with it.
Really?
Yes.
That seems very short-sighted, yeah.
Well, all right. Regina, you had your hand up before I said I wanted to give that comment. Go ahead, please.
No worries. Thank you. One thing that surprised me is that we haven't figured out a way to put some kind of teeth into the permitting process that would, be a cover sheet or have someone come out and mark the trees that are on public land when someone is permitted to do work at their home, to say, this tree cannot be removed or significantly damaged or harmed by the activities on your property. And if it is, here are the, there are repercussions to that, including pulling the permit or some other repercussions. And I hope that we can find a way, whether it's through the planning board, select board, or something, to put teeth into that process. I think the second thing that I wanted to speak to was finding some common ways of adding trees. So for example, when we have scheduled road repaving, I know a lot of the work that goes on with that is adding curbs and digging up the town land in front of homes, the tree lawns. And then they have to come and backfill it. Well, when they come and backfill it anyways, that'd be a great time to plant a more mature tree on the properties and include that in the process if possible. So these are just small thoughts and minor ways that we can maybe pool resources to try and add trees where possible.
Thank you, Regina. Elaine?
Yeah, no, I just had a quick question around the $45,000 loss ratio annually. I'm just curious of how far back that went and the history there. Like, has it always been that number? Is it increased over time? I'm just kind of curious of what years that data is from. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention anecdotally is that if you search tree on the community preservation.org database, there are examples of other communities that have used that for funding of replacing trees. So I just wanted to throw it out there as another option.
Great, thank you. Roxanne?
I think Carol Stalker was before me, if you could let her go first.
Carol?
I wanted to say that I thought Regina's suggestions were very good, particularly the one about involving a check on trees as part of the permitting process at the beginning. All the trees that I see getting cut down are getting cut down by developers, and the street trees, and they know what they're doing, but they know that there's no penalty. And then they will deny those trees ever existed. So I'm like looking through old photographs I took to say, no, I have a photo of that tree when it was standing there. But if you actually had some, as part of the permitting process, somebody come out and note the trees and photograph the trees, and part of getting your permits is that you don't cut down these trees. Because once they're cut down, restitution is kind of almost incidental.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add to that is on the planning board on larger projects, we've come over the time that I've been on and that Denny was on to require tree preservation plans and surveys that show existing trees, but our rules and regs still don't require the trees to be shown on the surveys. So even though we've done it on particular projects where we've been able to do it, we need to make sure that our zoning and our rules and regs are consistent with what we've been trying to do through our other kinds of projects. And so I appreciate those suggestions. It's also, I have found in my work as an architect, we go through painstaking approval processes in some communities, including detailed landscape plans, but building permits are certificates of occupancy are granted before the landscape installations are complete. And then there's nothing to enforce the landscape plans themselves. And so I think it's a consistent, or let's say a regular problem in many communities, but I think other communities are beginning to tackle it. And if your committee has any bandwidth to look into some suggestions and what other communities are doing, I think we certainly could take a look at that, but I'm happy to also take it to the planning board while I'm still on it, and make suggestions of what we can do zoning wise and rules and regs wise to help with preservation of trees. Roxanne.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. I know on our document, I did talk with Chase Berkeley about this particular item, and he did mention that there is a process for people to request a tree on the street near their home. He did say that part of the issue is that sometimes people aren't watering them, so they ask them to water them, and people expect that sometimes, not everybody, but sometimes people expect the tree and then it's just going to grow sort of magically, and it's like, yeah, but you have to water it too. So it takes, they've had to replace several trees because they weren't being watered. Some will naturally die as well, so I'm not saying that. And the other thing that they do in the DPW, and I think with this committee, is they look at the town in terms of the canopy on some of the areas and look and figure out which areas need trees. So I think that's really great. I think that he's done a wonderful job doing that. So I think it just takes, we just want to make sure that when people are requesting trees, they also know that it's a joint effort and they need to help us out here with that. The other thing I wanted to say with the document that was sent, just a quick thing that we might want to check with Chase Berkeley on is, do they have anybody in that department that could help in terms of an arborist? So I'm just wondering if there are any of their newer employees, for instance, that might have some of that background that could be helpful. Yeah, so I think having a conversation, he's pretty knowledgeable about what's going on with this, and I think they've done a really great job, and I commend the tree committee as well, Shade Tree Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
This has been very interesting, actually. I'm kind of curious. I think it was Fred that mentioned earlier on about the effects of climate change, and I think you said the northern maple would be vulnerable to
Sugar maple. I think it was sugar maple.
I'm kind of curious as to what the anticipated attrition of trees would be due to climate change. And then also, if you looked at this as a, if you wanted to return back to the original proliferation of trees per se throughout the community, what would that take? And if that were the goal, what would it take over the course of like 10 years, perhaps in the next master plan iteration, to achieve that kind of return?
What we had calculated was that the town was taking down about 130 trees a year, and that had gone on for about 10 years with very little replacement. And so our thought was, and what we proposed was that if they need to plant 130 trees a year just to stop the attrition, if they could plant another 130 trees a year on top of that, then in 10 years, we would get back to where we were. And the DPW, Chase Berkeley, has been wonderful in trying to do this. He's had a couple years where he's gotten to about 260 trees, but when the budget gets tight, then it gets very questionable whether they'll even get to 130, which is why Branch has been proposing having a hard number in the budget that would be separate from anything that the DPW would need to use it for anything else. So that's where that stands. I don't know whether the death of trees has really been increasing in town. We don't have the numbers long enough to know that. I know that sometimes storms have come through, and that one storm a year or two ago that just swept through and knocked a whole lane of trees all the way from one side of town to the other. That was horrible. I know when we had that big drought in 2000, I don't know if it was 2017 or something like that, there was a summer of drought. And we end up, you look 2 years later is when the trees are just starting to die, and it takes a couple years before you really see how much death occurred due to that. And I think the sugar maples in particular got diseased after they got weakened, and then you saw them die from the top down, and a lot of them have been taken down now. And I even think the Norways aren't doing that well around town because of that. So it may be that in the future, we're going to have to think in even bigger numbers if things get a lot worse. We just had another drought, and that's going to have consequences.
Yeah, I actually read earlier that this coming summer was going to be one of the worst with 18 extreme heat days. And so I can see this being a real problem with newer trees, or, even some of the older ones that are established. So
I think the comment I'd make about the watering, this is something we have really been working on. We put a tag on all the trees saying, please water me. We've been trying to get flyers to people about watering their trees. Carol Stalker has been writing one article after another to the Milton Times about how you got to water these trees. It actually, some people do, but I would say the majority don't. And we just haven't been able to get through on that issue. The town has a watering truck, but it doesn't really have the personnel or the time to get to every tree. It tries to get to the trees where there would clearly not be anybody available to water them, like on the town green and things like that. But we haven't really got a way of making sure those gator bags get filled all over town.
All right, so since I'm going to have to serve as clock keeper now, I'm going to call on Regina, and I will thank everyone who attended our meeting tonight. And I see Denny, I'll call on Denny as well after Regina. But then we're going to then need to move on to the other agenda items. Okay, so Regina, then Denny.
No worries. This is really quick because Warren set me up really well. I think it would be awfully nice to have an idea of what the shade tree amounts were for the past. We talk so much in our planning about preserving the character of Milton, and I think there are few things better than a tree-lined street that kind of exemplify what we think about when we think about our town, and what it looks like. Right. And so I think making sure that we tie it not only to climate change, which is for a lot of people this very esoteric, abstract future thing, but to our past, since there's so many here who identify with the past of Milton and want to preserve certain things about the past. I think making sure that our shade tree initiatives are clearly tied to that character would be a really, really helpful goal.
Thank you, Regina.
And then I think one other thing is to make sure that residents are aware of some of the best, whether it's ecologically or best chance of survival in the area, best trees to plant on their property if they choose. Because I would have no idea what those were, and would probably make horrible choices.
Thank you. I think that ties into making smart choices about energy efficiency, et cetera, right? So information for residents. Okay, Denny?
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl, for the kind words. We certainly did have our hands full on the planning board for all those years with all those tree issues arising, not only with the projects that were before us, but there were issues popping up all over town. We were driving all over the place looking at these barren lands that used to be fully populated. And I remembered one of our detective techniques we learned, I think it was after 333 Brush Hill Road, was that you can look at the chrome aerial photographs and figure out what was there 6 months ago. So that might be a little thing for you, Branch. If you're ever in a bind, you can learn a lot from from looking at the aerial visuals. You know, I think the other big lesson learned was an ounce of prevention is worth many pounds of cure. As we've said, a tree, you know, the best time to plant a tree is 50 years ago. And it's a real loss when we lose these older big trees. And I, like Regina mentioned, informing the homeowners of the rules and the penalties. We did a lot of discussion on that. A lot of times people move into a scenic way and don't understand the rules of the scenic way, and allowing, you know, sometimes those public hearings and things that are involved with removal of trees. And Cheryl and I certainly did a lot of informing the contractors of the rules of the road and following up and checking on those rules to make sure they were happening by sidewalks and so forth. But overall, I think Cheryl and I really learned that, you know, Milton is a really tree-friendly town, and the public and all the business owners and homeowners and everybody does really want to pull together for the trees. So if you do come up with some thoughtful language, in the end, it will be accepted. It's just got to be very thoughtful, and you have to kind of knock it around and think of it from all angles. But I'd be certainly very happy to help your committee or the Shade Tree Committee. I think you're doing wonderful work. You always do. So I just wanted to send my support to all of you. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Denny.
Thank you.
All right, then we may invite all of you back at a future meeting, but we're going to change topics now. So thanks so much for your time and for your interest and for all the work you do, because it helps us quite a bit. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm sorry. Will you be taking any comments on the bike path master plan?
Yes,
bike
I'm gonna,
or would you prefer
I
that?
had such a limited way of phrasing it on the agenda, so I wanted to see what the committee wanted to, if we wanted to take it up at the next meeting. Denny, so if you want to stick around, you're welcome to stick around for that, okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move to the agenda item 8, the discussion of support for Community Preservation Act funding applications, and we'll start with the pickleball. And we have Mary Blanchette, if that's how you say your name.
Yes.
And thank you for your patience, Mary, for through that conversation. I hope you found it interesting as well.
Yes, it's very interesting. And I believe, Regina, that there's a state website suggesting which trees are best to plant. I can get you more information on that later. So thank you for.
Yeah, there's also a listing at the DPW on the town website of recommended trees.
Mary, before you start, would you like for us to pull up your the information that you supplied to us, or would you just want to speak to it?
Well, I think that's kind of dense. It would be hard to read now. I just summarize.
Okay.
I'm with a group of about 35 pickleball players who just play together at both Kelly Field and at the Council on Aging. And we decided that we would apply for CPA funding to build dedicated pickleball courts in Milton, of which there are none now, outdoor courts. The application specifically asked for 8 dedicated courts, and the application was initially approved with the advice to get 3 things. A plan, feasibility study, to plan where the courts could go, and it could be 8 courts in one place, or 4 here and 3 there and 1 there, or whatnot. We had originally proposed Kelly Field and Andrews Park, and had kind of analyzed those. So then we were asked to get letters of support from both town committees and from people in the community. So the players went into action. We have accrued about 440 signatures from residents alone, many who abut Andrews Park. I'm specifically asking for letters from your committee and the planning board as well to provide a letter of support for our project. We'll be co-applying. We're not a 501(c), so we can't apply on our own. So we have partnered with Parks and Recreation, who have written a letter of support for the proposal. The one that's being addressed right now is for the feasibility study, and it's for about $20,000. And that will, like I said, identify locations where we could possibly put the courts. And then to also come up with a plan, of course, for how much it will cost. We know that we have to ask for at least $250,000, and that there won't be that much money available to CPC for a few years. And this falls under recreation. So the three things were the feasibility study and the letters of support, and I forget what the other thing was, but we did take care of it. We have identified Bill Madden of Lombardi Design, who'll be working with us to do the feasibility study if that money is granted to us.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Questions from the committee? So what I'll just give a little background on the topic of the funding. There's three buckets or three places that funds have to be directed from the CPC. It's historic preservation, open space and parks and recreation is one, and affordable housing. And the CPC committee has received applications for all three, and they will make a recommendation, and then their recommendation goes to town meeting for approval. And the chair of the CPC has suggested to applicants that they reach out to other committees and boards and residents to gather support. And so some have reached out to other bodies, and we have these two who have reached out to us. So while we don't have the full range of applications to to sort of weigh which ones might be similar or dissimilar, what we're going to do is consider what's before us tonight. So and this falls into the recreational aspects of the plan, of our master plan, and also the providing a cross-section or activities for a range of ages and different, so we don't have all of our parks and rec dedicated to youth, for example, or all dedicated to one sport or what have you. So this provides something that's different than what's being provided thus far in town. So I see Tabor, and then I see Dick.
So my question on this relates to, I guess, having not much of a pickleball player. I've played a few times, and so be it never in Milton, because of course it's hard to find the courts. But I'm just wondering, is it really a good idea to let this guy tell us what to do, or should we try to figure out what other towns have done first? And I don't know this guy from a hole in the wall. It sounds like he knows what he's doing, but 20 grand's a lot of money. And it seems that, between this and the other study, there's a lot of money going towards studies. And I don't know enough about granting a study funding that, I feel like I'm qualified. I'm not sure how what are his rules of operation here? You know, he's going to help locate, but you know, I don't know what his recommendations necessarily would be. Is that part of the sales pitch, or have you looked at other consultants, or is, you know, I guess I might ask why this guy and not somebody else?
We've looked at all of the CPC, all the CPA funding projects and recreation in the state. There have been many that have done significant projects. Getting the feasibility study is part of the routine. Rob Lavache recommended 3 landscape architects to me. I initially spoke with Chris Huntress, who you might know, who is working at Giles Field, a synthetic turf project. He initially agreed to do the study, but then decided that he didn't have time to do it. So Bill Madden is a Milton resident. He was involved with building the American baseball field at Cunningham Park. He does a lot of pro bono work for the town. He's very enthusiastic about helping the town. Our project is a little bit complicated because of I guess most towns are probably like this, but a lot of neighborhood opposition to having anything new put in their neighborhood, especially since pickleball is a little bit noisy. Bill Madden has worked on pickleball courts before. He's doing one in Wellesley right now, and he's done several other ones. His plan would include the drawings and a estimate of what engineering would have to be done, if drainage would have to go in or not, how much would the ADA access be, parking, you know, that's a big consideration. So that.
Thank you, Mary. I think.
Yeah, we don't have a specific place where he can just go and say, this is what it's going to be. So.
That's pretty good. I just didn't know the rules of how you go about hiring this guy and what are we really expecting out of him. I see the proposal, but it's not all inclusive. So I just
Yeah, so
wanna make sure.
Tabor, one thing I'm going to add for you is that at the last planning board meeting, there was an application we discussed for the farmer's market at Milton Landing. And Rob Levash, the chair of the CPC committee, was there, and he told us that committee had requested that applicants get some proposals, so that if they were asking for $25,000 or $20,000 or whatever the amount was, that it was based on actual figure that somebody could do it for. So I just want to give you that context for why some of the applicants had to go out and secure some of the proposals that they did. So like pickleball players did. So next, and Tabor, did you have anything else, or should I go next to Dick? Okay, Dick.
Hi, Mary. Nice, good presentation, and this seems to be a very worthwhile project. A couple of questions. The way I understand it, as you presented it, first you're looking for CPC money, a $20,000 grant to do the planning and design work, and then to be followed with. Are you looking for $250,000 also from the CPC, assuming everything is done correctly and to your satisfaction after the study?
It's a kind of a complicated process, and Robert has said that we're all learning together, because I asked him specifically what's the next stage. If they approve the feasibility study and then we get the information back from Bill Madden, then what do we do next? We would have to reapply again, or at least amend maybe Josh knows better what the procedure would be. But my understanding is that we would have to issue an amendment to our previous application. And that might not be until next fall, when new application round starts up again. And at that point, we would know how much we actually would need to ask for.
And what would happen if your request is not met? Would you also plan private fundraising from the interested pickleball players, or?
Well, a lot of towns have done that. Sharon got $100,000 from an anonymous donor, so we're definitely looking for any of you who are interested in that to go for it. We've talked to the Cunningham Foundation, and we'll continue talking with them. They're interested in building pickleball court. We may have to amend, the 8 courts down to 4 courts, or whatever, we can do that's reasonable.
Right. Well, to me, it's just one of those chicken and egg type of things where you're asking for feasibility money with no sort of guarantee that there's permanent funding afterwards. And I think it certainly makes sense, and that's the decision from the CPC. The other question I have is that anyone, I think, on this call understands that recreational land is at a premium in Milton. And I'm just wondering, as we're talking about whether it be Kelly or whether it be Andrews Park, what does the Parks and Recreation Department think about? Would someone have to give up land so you could site your project?
By give up land, you mean another sport?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you play
At those locations? No, we're not.
Branch laying on here, Branch, when we played Babe Ruth League baseball, would you give up part of the outfield, for example, to build pickleball?
Right, no. At Kelly Field, we're looking at the empty space that's down by St. Mary's Road.
Okay.
Which there's nothing there now but grass. And in reference to our previous conversation about trees, we also don't want to cut down any trees.
Okay.
And at Andrews, there's a corner up in the back that kind of parallel to the soccer field that's not utilized right now. It's at the bottom of the hill that abuts Granite Street.
I know where you are.
And then there's a few other locations that may or may not be feasible. The Parks and Rec has a project for, I believe it's Peverly Park, for a playground. And there's Turner's Pond, just looking around, like Peverly Park is a pretty good sized park. It's also easy to park at, and it's easy to access. So, I looked at Mary C. Lane. That's a very crowded, very small park already. There's no room there except for the area around the flagpole. There's a big circle in the middle. I even thought about that, take down the flagpole.
That's sufficient for me. I just wanted to make sure you would reference specifically both the Kelly Field and the Andrews Park. And I thought that decision had been made. And I just wanted to make sure that the Parks and Recreation were in sync with, if you were going to put 4 pickleball courts in, and I have a decent idea how big they are, that, would they be taking away land from soccer, from softball, from baseball? And I think that would be something that would have to be discussed and, be cooperated on to go forward.
One court is 60 by 30, including the perimeter.
I'm familiar, but thanks, Mary. I appreciate that. I'm all done.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Regina?
Thank you, Mary, for that. I really appreciate it. I'm not well versed in pickleball at all, but I have heard about multi-use courts and possibly using tennis courts or creating a tennis/pickleball court that
That's
would.
what we do now at Kelly.
Yeah.
Just tennis
And
courts.
so I'm curious if your proposal would be amenable to having this be primarily pickleball, but also have the lines and the other necessary features for it to be multi-use courts.
Well, like I said, that's what we do now at Kelly, and it works out fairly well. But we've grown from 10 people a year ago to 35 people playing regularly now. We requested dedicated courts, meaning that the nets are up all the time. Because now when we go, we have to set up our own nets every time and then take them down, which, yes, we can do that and we will do that if the other option doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Now
I
think about Milton Academy and their tennis courts.
What about them?
I'm just thinking about it. I just, maybe they'd be willing to work with us.
Yeah. And Curry College may also be
There you go.
amenable as well.
Okay, Regina, thank you. Roxanne?
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of comments and questions. First of all, I thank you for the presentation, Mary. I guess a couple comments are that there are a lot of proposals before the CPC. I know that Mr. Burke and myself, we sit on the landing committee, for instance. There's a proposal for the lockup building going for the CPC as well. I'm a little, I guess my question or comment, I guess I would say is, I think without seeing all their proposals, it's in front of us. I mean, it sounds like we have, sounds a little chaotic to me. It sounds like we have these, say 10 or 12 proposals, and everybody's running to these different committees to get the approval so that they can say that this committee wanted it or that committee wanted it. It sounds like, almost sounds like musical chairs. You're running around, sort of chaotically trying to get these approvals. What I would say is that I don't really think it's fair and equitable for all of these committees, because some will go to different groups, like, the two that have come before us today. Others will go before other, groups. And how do you weight the validity of those? I don't think that's really for us to do. I feel that there's a committee, the CPC, which is evaluating all of these proposals. And that's what we have that committee for. And I think that when we do this process of, saying, okay, we're going to put a letter for these two committees, what about the other 8? I mean, there's some other really great proposals out there. And just because they didn't come to us, maybe they went to another group, and another committee is going to put their letters in for them. It just sounds, I guess what I'm saying is we have a committee that is to look at all of the proposals. And I feel that that's the process that we should do. When we start doing it this way, who's to say that this committee is, what we say is more important than what another committee says? It's a little disjointed, I guess. I would prefer,
I definitely understand what you're saying. We specifically came to you because Rob Lavage asked me to. He asked me to go to engineering. He asked me to go to planning. He asked me to go to Parks and Rec. He asked me to talk to I'm doing what the chair of the committee asked me to do. It's not just willy-nilly. We're running around town asking everyone we know. And then it's not your job to decide who you're right. It's the CPC to decide. It's their job to decide who's going to get what. And this is what they asked me for. I think I haven't talked to him specifically about this, but I think in my view, he wants to make sure that there's support for the project throughout town. That if they granted, say, this 20,000, they're not going to get an outcry of all these people saying, why are you doing that? We don't want this. I think it's just to demonstrate the first stage that there is support in the community for the project.
And in putting these on the agenda, Roxanne, my thought was for that they both are related to suggestions or objectives in the master plan. And so if we view them in that context, that it, if it wasn't a topic covered in the master plan, then it may not make sense to come to our committee, for example. And I had similar question when the landing, the farmer's market and the landing came to the planning board. And, I actually at that time said I was supportive of that application, but didn't want to prejudice any of the others. And so I think we could say something like that too. We're not making an evaluation of putting one ahead of another, but what we would like to say is that we find that this application has merit and that deserves support and is consistent with recommendations in the master plan, for example. So we're not weighing it over the others.
I feel the same way. I mean, I think all the applications are great projects.
So I guess what I wanted to say was that I want to come off and just say that I'm not saying it's not a valuable project. Okay, I think it definitely is. I just want to make sure that whatever we do, I guess my question is, will other potential projects come to us and do the same thing? Or I'm just trying to get a sense of, what this process is,
Yeah, so Roxanne, I suggested at the planning board meeting on the same kind of concern you're expressing now, is that any application that has a planning relevancy, so this was planning board specific, so studies, for example, all of them would come to us next time around. So then, as Mary said, everybody's learning. This is the first application, so I think the committee is learning and the applicants are learning, and we trying to be helpful as residents, and other committee members are trying to learn along the way. And so I think that when these came to me and I added them to the agenda at the last minute, my understanding was that the deadline for the committee is pretty soon. And so that's why we put them on for tonight. And now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go so we can keep moving.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead to Warren and then Elaine. Thanks. Warren, you're muted still.
Thank you. Pickleball definitely has become quite the rage lately. The owner of the company I worked for says that he regularly loves to play it out in Nantucket. So I know it's growing in fashion and it's becoming pretty popular. So I'm kind of curious as to the feasibility study that you're looking for. Are you money for the feasibility study rather? Are you looking specifically at those locations at Kelly and Andrews that you indicated? I know, for instance, that at Andrews, and disclaimer, I live on Andrews as well, that along the Granite Ave, it didn't seem like that was an accessible location. So I'm trying to understand if the feasibility study is just in those locations, and would it include infrastructure necessary to access, that location per se in Andrews. And then also, in addition to that, would we be able to Regina's point, somehow add to the existing courts to make them more multi-use? Because earlier in this whole conversation, in this whole meeting, we had a presentation on climate action, and that discussed certain kinds of turf materials that were not necessarily beneficial to the I guess the town and the environment. So kind of curious about the practicalities of the feasibility study, and also the materials that you intend to be using, please.
Bill Madden actually spoke to me about that because that was something that was an issue in Wellesley. There's a wide variety of surfaces that can be used with a wide variety of cost. And they go from something called, I think it's pressed cement, and then just the regular, hard top. And then there's the, he has these permeable pavers that fit together. And those are good in situations where there's a lot of water and that drainage is controlled, more so it doesn't flood off the court into the surrounding areas. So all of that he'll look at. There's tennis courts at Andrews Field, which we've heard are underutilized, but they're also very close to houses, and it might be hard to get the neighbors to accept pickleball courts there. Bill Madden has been asked to not just focus on the CPC didn't want us to limit where we were looking. They didn't want us to just say Kelly or Andrews. So we're asking him to look at any other possible areas that he can find.
Okay, Elaine?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to build a couple of pickleball courts, somewhere in Milton. I think that it aligns with several strategies within our plan, identifying and developing additional recreational facilities, providing adequate recreational facilities for all ages. I've never played pickleball. I've heard it's a lot of fun, but I also recognize that, or at least articles that I've read have said that it's like the fastest growing sport in the US. So I do take a little bit of pause knowing that, only because, I wonder, will this attraction decline over time? And is there a way that we can, have multi-use courts so that if that's the case, we, have something else that we can use them for. I live on Granite Place right behind Andrews Park. My husband and I signed your letter. He came to our door. We had a lovely conversation. I don't know that Andrews or Kelly Park makes sense, but I do feel that it's worth looking into. There's a lot of things to consider. Pickleball is louder than tennis. There's homes right behind that area in Andrews. So, I'm not willing to say that I support those particular locations, but I do think, or I do support looking into the possibility. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't want to be setting up a competition here between our project and the other projects. I think they're all great projects. I just, like I said, I think they just want to know that there's support in the community.
Okay, so I would just like to add that I think a feasibility study and looking at the possibility of whether these could be located someplace, I think is a good use of CPC funds.
Denny, sorry, I can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I just want to say that I think, while there might be a lot of applications and some for a lot larger amounts of money to actually implement something, having this amount of money, which is a small amount relative to some, to look at the feasibility of doing these courts makes sense. What I like is much of our recreational space is devoted to youth, and I really love that especially when my kids were young. But we also have a large population of older folks who also could use recreational opportunities. And so I do think it would be a nice thing to invest in, at least the feasibility study. So we've spent a fair amount of time on this one, folks. So I'd like to call this discussion to conclude.
Could I just ask Josh if I got that process correct in the application? Did I answer that?
Yeah, that was correct.
Okay.
By and large, there's some sort of nuances. We're all still figuring it out as well. This is the first year that any of us have done this, but yeah, you were correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mary. We appreciate your being with us for a long time here tonight and your efforts in putting this together.
Okay, thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. The other application is not in the same category. It's in the affordable housing category. And Josh, if I'm not mistaken, there was only one application in the affordable housing category.
Yes, the affordable housing trust.
Yeah, so I think we could go ahead and at least have a short discussion about whether we want to take a vote on a support for the pickleball and then move on to the affordable housing. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay. Does anyone want to take the lead in what we should do here?
I'd be willing to support what you had suggested, which is a qualification on the support to say that, this isn't necessarily a review of, we're not picking this one over others. This is the one that we came in front of us and we do support it under these conditions because it meets the master plan committee goals. And, I think I've forgotten exactly what you said, but you phrased it very well, so.
All right, well, I helped Josh with the planning board's letter, which had that same kind of language. Yeah, I think what we just want to do, we didn't prejudice the others, we weren't putting one over another, but we do support this application and hope that they have funds, that can support multiple applications. I mean, I think that's the best we can do, in my view. And Roxanne?
I was just wondering when the deadline is for this
Josh, do you have the
round.
deadline?
I don't have it on the top of my head because the deadline of the funding applications was the 13th of January, and I'm not fully familiar with when they extended it to, but I think it will be after your meeting in February. So this is the only sort of round of recommendation letters that I think would be eligible for you all to vote on.
So I'm sorry, you think the deadline is going to be that the letters need to be submitted before our February 15th meeting?
I believe so, yes.
That was my understanding.
Their next meeting is, I think, the 8th or the 9th in that week of February to award funding. So that's certainly the last possible time they'll have.
It's definitely, I knew the deadline was coming. That's why we got this agenda revised right at the last hour. So what we could do is something similar to what we did at our last meeting, which is to, I would say authorize again, Josh and I to draft a letter. And since it would have to be we could maybe Josh, what you could do is confirm that date of when they would need to receive it. So we could see if we have time to review it at our next meeting, a draft letter.
I am very doubtful that you will have time for your next meeting, but I can send that date around as well.
All right. So what we could do is draft a letter. Any comments could go back to Josh, and he could amend it, since we wouldn't be able to circulate any changes outside of open meeting. I think I've got that right, Roxanne, right? Yes, okay. Are we comfortable with that approach? Okay, so Tabor, do you want to take a stab at a motion after this discussion again? We can.
I'm happy to. I just my knowledge of the language that's needed is pretty skimpy, but I propose that we write a letter of support for the pickleball application, the CPC funding, qualifying that support in that this is the only athletic or recreational proposal that we've reviewed, and that this meets the master plan's requirement or master plan's goal of recreational opportunities throughout town in an equitable fashion.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All right, Dick,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
I'm calling on people as I see them on my screen, so there's no logic to it other than that, folks. Regina,
Yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Elaine,
Yes.
Tabor,
Yes.
and myself, Chair, yes. Oh, and I'm sorry, Tabor, and were you authorizing Josh and I to write the letter?
Yes, that was, maybe I didn't phrase it that way, but I should have. Okay.
And Dick, did you still second it that way?
Yes,
And did everybody still vote in the affirmative that way?
Yes.
yes.
Yes, okay, great.
Check the
Uh,
tape. I think I said that anyway, but all right.
Yeah, okay. Now, on the Affordable Housing Trust, everyone get a chance to read that one.
No,
Oh, okay. So they had initially submitted an application with multiple, I would say sort of strategic opportunities that they would hope to pursue. And then they narrowed it to the property, the remaining property at the Old Town Farm. So this would be the property that wasn't sold to Pulte for the development there. They have been working with the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust, which is the select board members, and they've been, who themselves had been in touch with Mass Housing Partnership about doing a 100% affordable housing development on that property. And so their request for funding would be for some initial planning work, which include engineering, surveying, et cetera. And then a loan to a developer, an affordable housing developer. And that loan would be used as leverage in a 30-to-1 ratio to as a portion of the total funding sources to do the affordable housing development. This is a common strategy, you know, to get 100% affordable housing. There's multiple sources. Normally, we don't have a lot that comes from the federal government, honestly. A lot of it comes, and this is one of the reasons for the CPC to address affordable housing, is that there's limited sources for 100% affordable. So usually it's community, state, and then oftentimes low-income housing tax credit. It could be some other foundation or other, you know, sort of public interest kind of funding. But so this would be like the example that they showed, usually the smallest piece of the total funding stack. So it's a way to garner that kind of investment to get 100% affordable. The advantage of 100% affordable as compared to, let's say, a 40B development is, we think that 40B developments are all affordable, but really it's only 20% of the units that are affordable and 80% are market rate. So you're getting a lot of market rate units just to get those 20% affordables. So this is a way that the town can take its assets and try and get units that are on the subsidized housing inventory. And they note that while there's a lot of 40B developments have been approved, there's litigation around those as well. And they drop off the subsidized housing inventory if building permits have not been issued within 1 year of the ZBA decision. And so litigation takes longer than a year typically. So some of these 40Bs are going to drop off of the subsidized housing inventory, and our temporary safe harbor could be at jeopardy then. So addressing, so I'm summarizing. If I missed anything, Josh, please chime in. That's what I understand from having read the materials that we were supplied.
Yeah, that is an excellent summary, Cheryl. And just to clarify though, that as the only applicants for community housing funding, they have applied for approximately 1/3 of sort of the expected funds to the CPC, which would be a sort of equitable division between that bucket, as is sort of the aim of the CPA. That mandates that at least 10% of funds go to each of the 3 project areas, affordable community housing rather, historic preservation, and then open space and recreation. So this is really our only chance this year to fund a project for community housing. As the staff person for the Affordable Housing Trust, they've put together a really good application, and I've been working very closely with our department and MHP to get this started.
Question and comments? Dick?
How big a parcel are we talking about? And as part of the,
I've seen 3.5 to 4 acres.
and how many units are we talking about?
It doesn't say in the application.
Yeah, it's dependent on the financing. Previous surveys have estimated around 25 to 30 units is the expected.
And there would be, this would be 100% affordable, is that correct?
That's the intention of the committee.
All right, and how does this work with the, there's been always a lot of talk about the Governor Stoughton Trust in terms of devoting their interest to the poor of Milton. How does that work? How does that work out with this potential plan? Is this going to be open
to residents, to potential residents outside of Milton? Is that what you mean, Rich? Yes, they don't want to sort of overprivilege existing residents, because if you can currently rent in Milton, you are very likely not in need of 100% affordable housing. They didn't want to limit the pool so that they could be available to all.
Yeah, my understanding is that the state has cautiously allowed Milton to have a Milton resident preference for some of the units, but not all of the units. This is not necessarily for this project, but this was for a different one. And I attended a workshop that the state put on about affordable housing, and this topic came up and Milton came up, and they said that they had cautiously approved that Milton residents preference, but there's a fair housing that has to be considered. So not being an attorney on this, I'll just say that my understanding is that there can be some preference for resident Miltons, but not 100% of the units.
I can understand that,
but have not indicated a preference, a local preference. They really want to promote equity.
Well, I understand that, but I'm wondering how that fits into the charge of the Governor Stoughton Trust itself, which was fairly specific, even though it's subject to interpretation.
I'm just going to chime in. Their application said that they went to the Attorney General, I think it was, to get clearance on this, because that's who makes the decision about whether the land can be used for this purpose according to the will.
Right. Do we have something from the Attorney General saying that this is inappropriate and legitimate?
They said they did in the application. I don't know anything more than that.
Was my Roxanne, do you remember hearing anything in your meetings? I know you've been talking a little bit about this.
No, they would have to bring a proposal to the Attorney General to see if it fits the criteria, but it's clearly for the poor of Milton. That's the criteria that's in this trust and will, and technically the trustees have a fiduciary responsibility and so forth for the poor of Milton. And what's been happening is that there's a lump sum in there that when they sold Pulte, there's a amount of money over 5 million, and the interest is being used for the poor of Milton in terms of people needing, help with heating bills or food, those type of issues. And so they're serving a lot of people through like Milton, Milton Residents for the Elderly or whatever. Milton Fund that helps with, those type of bills and so forth. And they serve a lot of people.
Right.
They serve a lot of people with that.
But I'm going back to that. I think, Cheryl, you said you thought they had the sign off from the Attorney General. They don't have that yet. So we'd be signing off or supporting this project pending further deliberations with the Attorney General to make sure that what they want to do, they can do. Is that correct?
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to issue an RFP without that approval, my understanding is.
So, but if we were to support them and they were to receive, how much money are they looking for, Josh?
Their application is for $533,000. Do you need the breakdown?
Well, no, I'm just wondering, that's a fairly substantial amount of money. So if we were to sign off on something like this, notwithstanding the merit of the whole idea, I'm just wondering, this whole Governor Stoughton Trust has been a sort of a Gordian knot for years in terms of, there's been a number of conversations, I think, starting with the Secretary of State and then working its way to the Attorney General's office. But I don't think up to this point, anyone has anything as to the definition of the poor of Milton and how this, how the charter and how the trust would work into some of these proposals.
So I just want to give you the numbers. $33,000 is for the study aspects of it, and $500,000 would be used as a loan to the development. So $8,000 for land surveying, $10,000 for engineering evaluation, and $15,000 for architectural conceptual designs. What that says is that that they would use that funding, working with the select board and the Mass Housing Partnership to get to a place where they could then issue an RFP, at which point the $500,000 would be kicked in as once a respondent or a developer had been selected. So it's used at two different points in time.
Could we separate it very much like we were talking about the pickleball courts in terms of the $33,000 is what we'd approve now, and then the remainder post fact after they receive some sort of direction and support from the Attorney General to allow us to do what they want to do?
You're not approving the funding, nor are they able to change the application they've already submitted. So no.
I'm not approving anything. I'm just saying in terms of they're looking for some support. And I'm just wondering, for our support, could it be that we would support the planning application? Because the rest of it seems to be sort of a moot point until they have the authority to kind of move forward on this thing.
Well, I think it's obviously that the funding would only be used for that if they get the approval to do it. And once they do that additional due diligence, I mean, due diligence may find that there's other reasons why it's a challenging site. I don't, you can't move forward until you've got that first piece done. And as far as like whether the state and the CPC, one of the leading reasons for doing it is to fund affordable housing. So, I would hate to see that only 33,000 be allocated for affordable housing and the rest of the funds go to open space recreation and historic preservation when we know we've got this significant challenge. So I will.
And that this is 100% affordable housing.
Right. But that's not our call. I mean, we're not making a determination as to how much money they get or if they get money at all, right? They're just looking for support from this.
Right, we're just backing the idea.
Okay, so Dick, did you have further comment or question?
No, I don't. But I think it's one of those things that's almost like a chicken and the egg type of thing. I said, if they have the go ahead, I mean, certainly I support this. I mean, I think all of us support affordable housing. This is a question. What the question becomes, what are we supporting?
Okay, Tabor, you're next. I'm sorry, I'm gonna look at my list here. Elaine, I don't know if you ever answer to Dick or you have a separate comment.
Well, the answer, I think what we're supporting is affordable housing, but I have a separate comment. Are you all set?
Dick?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My hand down.
So I just wanted to disclose, so I have been part of the Milton Housing Coalition since early 2022, and it's just a group of concerned residents and community leaders who work to identify and advocate for affordable housing in Milton. We work very closely with AIM, even more so recently. So I wanted to state that I fully support this application, but I am unfortunately not going to vote on this one tonight.
Okay, thanks, Elaine. Tabor?
Let me start with Elaine. What does AIM mean?
Affordable, including affordable. Sorry, affordable. And it's hard to say.
Hence why you call it AIM, I guess. All right. Affordable what? Income?
Inclusive Milton.
Oh, okay. All right. So I mean, I'm very, as others have said, I'm supportive of the concept here, but I just seem that with all the numbers involved, these are very big numbers. I haven't the foggiest notion what they mean, and I mean, this is my bread and butter. This is what I do for a living. I'm in real estate, but I don't feel qualified at all to vote on the veracity of the numbers or et cetera. I just think if it's for affordable housing, that's a good thing, but I don't think. Honestly, I mean, I just don't see my vote counts for much if I really don't understand the concept, the whole process. We don't have a plan. We don't have anything else. All we have is, a promise of some units, but it doesn't even say, I mean, Dick said 25 units or Cheryl, but we don't even know how many units. So I'm a little leery of supporting things that I really don't understand, except for the affordable part.
Roxanne?
Thank you. What I was going to say about this is that I think most people here will say that we support the concept of affordable housing. I think that's what we're all saying. However, this application is very specific to this site. And I think that's what we're all discussing. And I think the thing is that there are a bunch of issues with this because it is a trust involved. You have trustees, which the select board are trustees of this. There's a lot of nuances to this. And so I feel that we don't know enough information really about a lot of things regarding this. I think that, in terms of the numbers and so forth, but for myself, I would not be able to vote on this. I don't have enough information, even at the select board level. I'm still gathering information with this. And again, this is specific to this site. So it's not saying, affordable housing on some other parcel in Milton, it's saying this specific site. So I think there are a lot of good points that were raised by several other speakers on this as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you. And,
Roxanne,
again,
I have
just
a
remind
question.
people it's before.
I'm sorry, wanted to ask you, has the select board, well, probably not because you're the trustees of the Governor Stoughton Trust, so they haven't been able to come to ask to you as the select board to ask for support?
The Affordable
Housing
Committee,
Trust?
Housing Trust came to us, Tom Callahan and Julie Creamer, and they talked to us at our previous meeting about it. As you know, I'm one of the newer members, so I want some more information and background, and that's what I've been trying to gather. So they did come to talk about it, to talk about a way to, if the trustees approved of, going and signing a joint application to get some information on this land of what could be done there. So it was at our last meeting. Actually, we had a Governor Stoughton Trust specific meeting, but at our last meeting, they came to our last select board meeting.
So as trustees, do you always meet in executive session?
That was not
an open session?
So that
Okay.
happened in our last meeting. I believe it was at the end, and I don't recall. I think we may have moved it up to the very end of the meeting, and then we went into executive session. So yeah, it was at the end of the meeting, but no.
But not executive session?
No, that was not an executive session, nor was our dedicated meeting for the Governor Stoughton Trust, which was, I want to say, the 10th maybe of January. That was an open session as well.
So has this So the select board hasn't taken a position about whether
Not yet.
they want to pursue use of this property for affordable housing? Because I thought the select board had decided that they were going to do that subject to Attorney General approval. Is that not the case?
You'd have to look at the last meeting. The last meeting, they came to us
Mhm.
and they wanted, I'm trying to think what that organization is. Josh might know. That does, looks at your land, will look at this land and have some proposals of what you could do for affordability. I can't think of the name of it. Right.
Maybe
this
the Mass
minute.
Housing Partnership? That's who the
Yes.
Affordable Housing Trust is for.
Yeah,
Okay.
so what was happening is they came to us, and that was what they had wanted to do, to see if they wanted to see if we would sign on as trustees to a joint letter to that partnership to look at affordable housing on that property.
All right,
They
so,
proposed that idea, that was it.
so when I
But
was
yeah,
so when I was attending housing committee meetings, when Melinda Collins was on the select board and she chaired the housing committee before
mhm.
it was dissolved after the housing production plan was updated and approved. Those discussions go back probably 2 or 3 years. So there's been no position taken by the select board over those 2 or 3 years. You know?
I wasn't on there at that point, so
Okay.
you'd have to ask, the chair.
Because their letter says that to reinitiate discussions with Mass Housing Partnership. So it wasn't like to begin discussions, but reinitiate. All right, well,
Cheryl,
Yeah.
could I suggest that maybe
Mhm.
we go back and get the information,
okay.
before we can, I don't know, see what other members want to do.
Okay, Regina, you have your hand up.
Yeah,
also.
no, I just had a quick question. So
Mhm.
Roxanne, when they came before the select board, they didn't mention anything about the number of units or anything?
No, but they did submit something on our packet at one point that showed when this was looked at in, I want to say 2019, there were it looked at something with 2 different buildings. One of,
Yeah.
I want to say 21 units and one of like 25. That was done by some firm
Mhm.
back then.
So we at
but
least
that
have,
was-
we at least have a ballpark. It's under 50. But
Well,
more
I
than.
don't know, what it would be now, you know what I mean?
I think partly, Regina, is until they have a survey, until they look at some engineering and
Yeah.
architectural concepts, which they need the funding for. They
Okay.
don't really know how many units.
But it sounds like we can at least ballpark it between 20 and 50 units,
Yeah, I'd say that's probably right.
Yeah.
right?
50
And I
is
know
very
that's.
high.
I think
Say
I,
again?
I
55.
wouldn't peg it higher than 35 at the most, given our
Okay,
previous
so
surveys.
that's even better, 20 to 35 units. So that to me clears up this really nebulous notion of how many units we're talking about. We know it's 100% of those units that are affordable housing. So what more information do we need to be able to say, yes, we support 100% affordable housing developments in Milton? I'm just curious, what would make you more comfortable with making that statement, which I think by supporting this and saying, we can blanketly say, as the MPIC, this is part of standard number whatever, that we support affordable housing in town, which matches with this proposal as written, although more information would be better. We can guarantee that we support a 100% affordable housing solution, so long as all these other things are followed, that, we're not going to egregiously damage the environment, and we're not going to put it in the middle of Milton Center, or whatever you want to add to that letter to say we support 100% affordable housing development.
So in this case,
what do we
in
need
this
to
case,
add?
Regina, you were saying it would be subject to, trustee approval, Mass Housing Partnership approval.
Yeah, I mean,
committee approval, et cetera.
I'm really asking that question in an open
Mhm.
way. Like, if we know that there's a limit to the amount of units, 20 to 35, then we've gotten over that hurdle. What more do we need to know? And I think putting together questions for them or what have you to be asked and hopefully answered before our next meeting that would allow us to say, yes, we sign off on this. Because what I hate to do is to push it down the line, and delay it for some nebulous concept of we'll be more certain when we know this.
Yeah,
You know,
actually, we don't have until the next meeting because they're going to have their meeting before our next meeting. So, Roxanne.
So I think we need to make a decision of, do we stand for 100% affordable housing development over 40Bs, and ask whatever question we need to in the letter of support to hopefully, get those answers, or at least qualify our support for just like we did for the pickleball court. I don't understand what's remaining to be able to answer that question. Tabor.
I think Roxanne was first.
You
Roxanne,
can go
then
ahead,
Tabor.
Tabor, if you want to. Okay.
I think what Regina said, though, then was got me thinking a little more. What we're really asking for is, this isn't, and there's a lot of numbers, there's big numbers, and I think it's very distracting. And honestly, I got to say that I think the letter was just sort of, or the application was kind of poorly written. It should have said, we're looking for money for a feasibility study, and to see how feasible this site is. And as Roxanne says, it's a specific site. I would support it under one condition. Could we call it something different than the poor farm? Because honest to God, I mean, how are we going to get,
I was going to say that, but I felt bad. I was like, why am I nitpicking?
I mean,
Right, do they
that's
call
the
it
nit
that?
I'd
They
like to
do
pick
call
on
it
this
that.
one, honestly. But if it's a certain amount of money, and I think it was 33,000 for a feasibility, okay. Just ask for the 33,000 for feasibility, and if they get it, then we have to go into further study. But right now, we don't know if it supports 25 units or 35 units or even 18. I mean, as Josh has said, it is vague because they don't, we've got to have the work done. And
So
if that's all we're asking for, I can get behind that. So anyway.
I'm just going to add something to what you just said there, Tabor. In terms of, and what a number of you have said about a specific site. Their first application actually was a work plan with 8 initiatives. And the first one was working with the Governor's Stoughton trustees to develop the town for 100% affordable housing and issue an RFP this calendar year. The CPC committee asked them to go back and be more specific and pick a site. So they're not here. I just remember hearing that. And so, but that, just like with the pickleball, the CPC guided all of the applicants to go back and be more specific. And so I think Regina makes a very good point that we can be supportive of an initiative to have the town use town assets for 100% affordable housing. And if this site makes sense and the things line up that need to line up, then this site is their choice. But we're not making it a determination about the site being a good one or a bad one.
But isn't that what they're asking us to do? I mean, we all can support, I mean, that, and then being very consistent with the master plan, support affordable housing at 100%, I guess.
Dick, I think that's really as simple as it is. That's
You
just
know,
that's my novice take on it is, because we're not being asked to give them anything. We're not being asked to do anything except say whether or not we support this idea, and let somebody else down the line, enabling the trustees of the Governor's Stoughton Trust, make those determinations, and the funding agencies that they're going for make those determinations.
I agree with you, Regina, but the idea is that isn't what was before us. They were asking us to support affordable housing at this site, and I'm saying that there's a lot of ifs here. If the trustees go along with this, and I'm a little concerned about the fact that they were with the trustees, I guess, Roxanne, recently or within the past few days, looking for support as for this proposal. And then we have if the Attorney General would sign off on this, and then there's a whole other piece of it, and we've seen this in town over and over again. What's going to be the reaction of the abutters and neighbors to something like this? Do we want to get into a big protracted, legal argument or something?
I think that's beyond what we're asked to do here. And I think we're making it harder than we need to. Either we're for a project that is for 100% affordable housing, or we're not. And we can qualify it in the letter in any way we choose and say, we don't know about this particular site, but obviously we support the idea of 100%
So
affordable housing.
you think we should just say that we would support 100% affordable housing on a site in Milton to be determined?
I think I feel comfortable with that. I mean, I would feel comfortable saying that about, the site, assuming the trust agrees with that site.
Yeah, but we haven't done that yet, and that's not our purview. But I'm with you. I think if all they're asking for us to do is support 100% affordable housing at a site to be determined.
Can we all agree on that?
That's fine. I think what it flies into is what they're asking for is $533,000, of which $500,000 is actually a down payment on something like that. I mean, I'm certainly for.
Dick, I'm even fine if we say we are for the scouting and survey of land in Milton for potentially 100% affordable housing, like however you want to couch it. As long as we are not at a no tonight, I'm happy.
Well, actually, that way they should modify their application maybe so that.
But they can't. Josh said they can't. Josh said
Their
they
application
can't.
has been submitted. The site that they are working on with MHP, with town staff, is the Governor's Mountain Trust land. That is the site for which they've gotten their budgets for this work, and is where the town and the trustees, who the town sort of relies on to be experts on this matter, think is a viable site for this work. They just need
So
the money
wait,
to
Josh,
do that.
can you please clarify that the town staff is working with the Affordable Housing Trust? And did you say the trustees are also have been supportive? Because this is what the question I had before.
The Affordable Housing trustees are the trustees to whom I refer.
Oh, okay.
Town staff, being the department that I am a part of, Planning and Community Development, have been working very closely with the trustees and MHP on the development of this RFP as much as we can without additional funding. The site has been picked, the application has been submitted for the amount of money that has been requested. That being said, all you are committing to is to support the Affordable Housing Trust's intention and their application. This does not commit MPIC to any legal questions or concerns. If the Attorney General decides that this is not within the letter of the law, that does not have any bearing on MPIC's judgment or your decision this evening.
Well, and it's without question that any project like this would go through a community review process, and including neighbors. There's that I'm just assuming would be part of the process, but we can make that clear as well if we need to. I see Roxanne and Elaine.
Okay, Elaine?
I just wanted to call attention to one thing that was said by a member, and that was there's a lot of ifs there. And I just wanted to ask my fellow members to consider the ifs in the previous application that we considered. If the site's viable for pickleball courts, if they receive enough funding, if abutters don't take major issue with the location. I think there's a lot of ifs with all of these. So I, just echo Josh's comments about supporting their intention and application. Thank you.
Good point, Elaine. Okay. Are we at a point where we think we have some consensus, folks? No, Roxanne?
I just wanted to just add that this is a different situation. So this is a situation where a trust owns the land, and this trust has to follow the will and the what that means for the poor of Milton. So it's a little bit different than looking at all different land. This is specific. It's unfortunate that this application didn't have, to Regina's point, affordable housing somewhere in town, and looking at different locations or however you wanted to phrase it. But this is specific to this site. So this is an application specific to the town farm site. That makes it a little bit different.
It does, absolutely,
and
Roxanne. And
So I think that's the different
when you wear your
part.
other hat, that's your job to deal with, right?
Right. And so I think it's a different situation. And I think that we all have to be cognizant of that is different than, again, looking at other town sites. And we have to follow what they're looking for with regards to, for the poor of Milton. How we've been using it so far has been truly for the poor of Milton. So again, I think we have to be aware of that.
But that's
so-
not in our purview though, Roxanne.
It's in
Like
this, it's in their purview.
We're
in
not
your purview
responsible
as
for the
trustee.
Governor Stoughton Trust. You, with your other hat on, are, but that's not our job to make that determination. We are solely here to say whether or not this particular application fills a need in the master plan that
Right,
we
but
agree with.
it's remiss of me not to point that piece out so that people understand that this particular parcel, this is in a will and a trust for this particular parcel.
And I think we all
So that's
understand
what
that, but it's
I'm just
not,
trying
but
to
it's not
say.
our purview to make decisions about that trust. And I think if we tried to, then you'd have to say that, right? That's not within our purview.
So I think Regina made a suggestion that Tabor and Dick and Elaine, even though she said she's not going to vote, and I seem to think made some sense, and Roxanne still has reservations for, and I don't think we've heard from you. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I work in affordable housing, so I find a huge amount of value in it, and there are different types of affordable housing, right? So, elderly, disabled, family, there's just, it all enriches a community if it's done well. I haven't spent enough time with this application to really know one way or the other. I see such value in everybody's arguments right now, but I'm not confident that I would be making a good decision without a little bit more time to review this at this point. That's my 2 cents right now.
Okay, thank you, Warren, for your thoughts. Maybe that's why you've been quiet, because you feel like you haven't quite ready with a decision. But I think we have to make some kind of decision, either to act or not act, tonight in order to meet the deadline. So at this point, I will accept whatever motion wants to be made by one of my fellow members.
I'm happy to make a motion. You can help guide me to make it sound reasonable. I'd like to make a motion for this committee to support the affordable housing application presented to us, with the caveat that we support 100% affordable housing developments in the town of Milton, and that we leave it to others, namely the Governor Stoughton Trust, to evaluate whether this site is the right one for this project.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is there further discussion?
I
Okay,
just wanted to take a little bit of an issue with what was said earlier. This is a little different from the previous proposal before us, in as much as that we were voting on a study to be where property, if it's feasible, to be determined. This proposal is linked together. It puts me in an awkward situation. I have no problem either with affordable housing and or a study. What I do have a problem with is the earmarking of the rest of the money to this.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Earmarking the rest, the $500,000. We're taking a planning piece, putting it with actual funding, and I'd be more comfortable if they were separated.
We don't have that option.
To say 30
I know we don't, Regina. I'm
33,000.
just saying, this is just my comment. I
But
understand.
could we stipulate it and ask for Regina's proposal to say, we endorse a $33,000 feasibility study? And leave it at that, or, I don't know.
That would be fine with me.
One thing I would say about it is, I think you want the money to, if the project is viable, it won't be viable. It's likely to be a lot less viable if you don't have the source of funding to leverage. And so, if this site does become viable through the trustees of the trust and the Mass Housing Partnership and the Attorney General, then we would have handicapped it because it doesn't have that piece of funding. But I think what Josh said before was that we can't separate them out, that it's one application that,
Well,
so I guess.
We gotta shit or get off the pot, folks. It's that time. Let's go.
Is there any further,
Motion's on the table.
well put.
any further discussion? We'll go to the vote. Tabor,
Yes.
Dick,
No,
Warren,
Please come back to me.
Elaine,
Abstain.
Roxanne. I'm sorry, you're muted, Roxanne.
Sorry, I will say at this time, I'm going to abstain.
Regina,
Yes.
the chair, yes. Warren,
I have to abstain at this point.
okay, so where does that put us? 3 yeses, 3 abstentions, and 1 no. Right? So what does that actually say? It says that we write the letter in support?
Is 3 a quorum? I mean, is 4 a quorum?
Well, we're a quorum, we all vote.
3 out of
Right.
4 voted, 3 didn't vote, right? So we need a quorum is more than 50%?
A quorum is 4, right?
We're writing the letter, folks. Let's do it.
All right, so I'm sorry, we did this again. And Regina, in your motion, were you authorizing Josh and I to draft the letter?
Yes, I'm authorizing Josh and Cheryl to write the letter.
That's
And
what I
Tabor, is that
seconded.
what you seconded? Okay.
Yes.
And that's what we voted, we still vote yes for, and no
Yes.
for, and abstain for? Okay. All right, we're at 10 o'clock and we're not quite done, folks, okay?
I just
So,
have a question, Cheryl.
sure.
Okay, 2 questions. One is wondering if we can do the bike thing at the next meeting. It's already 10 o'clock.
So this is.
And it's an
what-
important
I've
thing
gotta
to
go.
go through. And the other thing I would say is, based on the number on that vote, I'm a little confused because it looks like how many were in favor?
3,
I'm counting 3.
Right.
So.
3
and then-
versus 1.
Well, aren't the abstentions
They
not
don't- they
in
didn't
favor?
vote.
it's not abstaining from voting.
Can we revote? Are you gonna leave it that way? Okay, but I mean, anyway, so, I mean, I guess my question is when you're sending it through to the committee, I mean, are you going to say that there was some concern from some of the other members? It wasn't, how are you going to phrase it, I guess?
Do
Because
we
there's
need a
obviously
reason
concern.
for each of the abstentions? Is that what you're asking it to include in the letter?
No, I guess I'm just asking in general that there were, that we had, a couple that no and abstentions, just wondering.
I don't
It
think
wasn't
that's a part-
unanimous, so
that's
it
not
wasn't
a part-
unanimous.
Yeah, and we wouldn't include unanimous in it, but I don't think the number of abstentions and no's is a part of the.
I think we could say, like Regina said, when she said that the selection of the site is subject to other bodies. I mean, I think we could say that there was some concern among committee members that process hadn't played out yet. Regina, is that something that you're supportive of, and Tabor, you're supportive of in the letter, or?
I mean, I think Roxanne, you're gonna get a vote down the line as a trustee, right?
Yes. Yep.
And we're
Yeah, this
we're
is all
not
subject
tying,
to a lot of permits, not just
yeah,
ours, but-
we're not trying to tie your hands in that. So I hope you feel particularly empowered that your abstention doesn't stop anything. So
Will the committee get a chance to review the letter? I guess is the question.
if you, yeah, I think that we've certainly done that
Yeah.
before.
Yeah,
I
okay,
will
that's
send
good.
it around for editing, but it can't be revoted on.
No, I understand that. That's all.
So
That's
thank
fine.
you. This is a bit challenging with this kind of, I guess, sort of last minute agenda item and short duration of time in which they need these letters. So I'm sorry that we didn't have more time. This is all the time that presented itself to me. And I felt it worthy of bringing it to the full committee, given the importance of these topics in the master plan. So we'll try and if we get requests down the road, give a little bit more time for consideration, okay? I appreciate the discomfort that it causes everyone. All right, so we ready to move? And Roxanne, you bring up something that Denny brought up as well. And, you know, I have on the agenda, because we voted at our last meeting, we voted to support the bike and pedestrian master plan with the caveats that we expressed at the meeting. So we did have that vote. We do have that letter. We don't have reopening discussion on the agenda. So we would have to have someone make a motion and the committee support reopening the discussion if that's what you want to do. Otherwise, it's just a discussion of the letter. Warren sent comments as well, and I forwarded them just today because what I had replied back to Warren was what I just said now, and that it's still comments can still go to, like we said at the beginning with Sustainable Milton. Anyone can still submit comments to the town administrator and the select board and the planning department directly, because we're not the ones that's like the sponsoring body of it. It's going to be them. So we're like one of the ones that are being asked to submit support letter, but we're not the body collecting the support letters. And so I just want to be clear about that, because maybe there was a little confusion. And Denny, you've stuck with us this long. So thank you for your comments. And I really, I hope that what I just said, what I just explained makes sense to you. I mean, but I will see if the committee is willing or interested and wants to reopen discussion. Tabor, you have your hand up.
I'm sorry, I've just got some family issues. I'm gonna have to leave. It's
Okay.
late. I can't stay up any longer here. But go ahead, and you got a quorum, proceed without me. I'm sorry to leave in the middle of this, but I just can't, I can't stay any longer.
Okay, thanks, Tabor. Roxanne, you have your hand up.
I do. I'm just wondering if we can reopen it, but is there a way that we can bring this up for the next meeting? I think it's really important stuff and important points that Mr. Lizio has and Ms. Swenson has. And I had some things as well, but at 10 o'clock at night with all the stuff we've been discussing tonight, I'm, a little tired, so, I mean, I think most of us probably are. And it's an important, subject because it's a plan that's part of our master plan and important stuff. And so I would prefer if there's any way we could reopen it, just in terms of perhaps maybe suggesting certain things that could go into the letter or into the plan that are specific, that I know that both people, Ms. Denson and Mr. Lizio have brought up, and I brought up some things too. So it's just an important subject. And I feel like at 10 o'clock at night to bring up something important to discuss, it's just hard to do that at 10.
Elaine, you have your hand up.
I actually just wanted to agree with that. I'm happy to reopen it. I think there's some great points that were brought up, but I think that my brain's a bit fried at this time and it's just not going to be the best conversation. So, but
so I just wanted to ask, sorry, Elaine, were you done? Yeah.
Done.
Right. Josh, what's the timing of this going to the select board?
if it is taken up at their, not their next meeting, but the one following, you've got at least a week and a half to submit additional edits beyond the ones you've already sent. So if like Member Lizio, you have a full slate of comments that you want to submit straight to the select board, that's perfectly valid. If you want to email me or call, I prefer an email actually. If you want to email me with other edits you have, please feel free to do so. I won't plan to submit until the last minute, until I've heard from you all.
But Josh, Roxanne, do you know when it's going to be on the agenda?
For February? I have no idea. That's not, they don't do the agenda till pretty last minute, but we meet every 2 weeks. So I guess my question would be, what is the harm in making sure that we have all of our comments and we have it right for other people that want to come, you know what I mean? Like if it's a month out or whatever,
yeah.
is that a problem? I mean, I just want to
No,
make sure
I've
that we
never
have a chance to
that.
discuss it all. That's all,
You
Well-
just had a month and a half to send me edits. So I'm just happy to keep the ball rolling. I don't want you to lose momentum on this work.
All right.
Well, I misunderstood that piece of it because I guess I thought that we have some comments here that it would be nice to at least, make sure that some of these things get in a future document. So you're saying that we could still comment within the next, week or so, and that you'll submit a letter that we can look at? I'm a little confused, I guess.
I guess
Yeah.
one of the things I would say to that, Josh, is as far as reopening it, we just need to have a vote. I'm not making a judgment about whether to open it or not, reopen it or not. But what I am commenting is that the letter needs to reflect the comments that are discussed at the committee. Because otherwise it's just comments being submitted that the rest of us haven't weighed in on. So if somebody wants to make a motion that we reopen the discussion and we do that at our next meeting, I'll take the motion, but I just want to get the mechanics. I want everybody to understand what I'm trying to say about the mechanics of it. So the mechanics of it have to reflect, what we've done and what we plan to do. Okay. So does that make sense now? On the mechanics side? All right, Warren.
My apologies for not understanding those mechanics. I thought following our meeting that we were looking for additional information, additional comments following our meeting. So Cheryl, your comment about making sure it's an open conversation that we discuss the topics that everybody has makes a lot of sense.
That's part of the open meeting law. And so sending them separately, and if not having a discussion about them is outside of the open meeting. Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah. And sorry if I wasn't clear about that earlier. So at this juncture, since I know we're not going to talk about the letter, it's either we're going to talk about the letter at the next meeting or somebody can make a motion now to reopen the discussion at the next meeting. And we'll take a vote on that.
I'd like to
Roxanne.
make a motion to, sorry, Roxanne, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to reopen the discussion at our next meeting.
Is there a second?
I will second. Yeah.
Couple of seconds. All right. We're all getting punchy.
Seconds
Warren.
everything within half a second.
Warren,
In favor?
Regina,
Yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Elaine,
Yes.
and the chair, yes. All right. We have one last thing though, guys. We're not done. And this is, we can defer if you want, but we don't have a lot of time. I've been asked to submit to the select board our annual report by February 17th. So we can discuss it at the 15th, but if for some reason that meeting doesn't happen on the 15th, then I won't be able to make the deadline. So what's your call on that?
Is that a hard deadline?
It is a hard deadline because it goes to print.
How long of discussion do you anticipate?
Well, it depends if everybody read it and if you feel like you want to make any comments on it. Otherwise, I don't expect a lot of discussion on it.
I'd prefer to wait to the next meeting.
Okay. We will defer that discussion.
Can we get a reminder to make sure that we have read over that particular part?
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with that.
After I got back from my vacation and recovered from my flu and I wrote all these documents, no, it's perfectly fine. I just, if for some reason the meeting on the 15th looks unlikely, maybe you can just let Josh know if you have any comments on the document, so we get it submitted on time, okay?
Okay.
All right, so with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll make a motion.
All right, in reverse, but we got Roxanne and Elaine. All those in favor, Dick,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
Elaine,
Yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Regina,
Yes.
and the chair, yes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Right.